Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel Paranormal M, and thanks for being here for another video. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. And if you've had something weird or unexplained happen to you, you can always send your story to me. The first story is about someone staying in their parents' old Victorian home, in a room that had always made people uneasy. At first, it just felt creepy, but one night, it became a whole lot more than that. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll still be able to sleep fine tonight. I should probably start with a little background, because otherwise this whole thing sounds even more unhinged than it already does. I grew up in this really old Victorian house, the kind with one of those historic plaques out front, except ours says 1891, which somehow made everything feel extra dramatic. When we were kids, my older sister Marissa was always talking about strange things happening in her room. She'd mentioned seeing lights or shadows out of the corner of her eye, feeling like someone was watching her, and swearing her stuff had been moved around. Now, to be fair, that last one might have been my younger sister and me messing with her, because we absolutely stole her clothes and random junk all the time. Just standard sibling crime. So nobody really took her seriously. The rest of us never felt anything weird in the house, so we all kind of rolled our eyes and figured she was being dramatic. Anyway, my parents still live there, but all four of us kids have moved out now. Over time, our old bedrooms got repurposed for my parents' hobbies and storage and all the usual parent takeover stuff. But the guest room? That ended up being in Marissa's old room. The exact room she used to complain about. And now, pretty much anyone who sleeps in there says it feels off. Maybe that's karma for all of us brushing her off for years. Maybe the universe just likes an "I told you so." Either way, I'm nearly 30 and I still sleep with a light on in that room. For years, I never actually saw anything, but I always got this heavy feeling like someone else was there with me, just outside what I could explain away. That changed last January, and I'm not being dramatic when I say it scared the life out of me. I was house-sitting and dog-sitting for my parents while they were away. I wasn't feeling great that night, so I went upstairs to sleep in the guest room while my boyfriend stayed downstairs watching TV. I was in that weird half-awake state, you know? I'd drift off for a second, then wake myself back up and try scrolling on my phone, then drift again. At some point, with my eyes closed, I became aware of movement right in front of me. It felt like someone was pacing beside the bed. I remember trying to reason it out. I told myself I must have fallen asleep longer than I thought, and my boyfriend had probably come upstairs without me hearing the old door creak open. So I kept my eyes shut. A few minutes passed, and I started getting annoyed because this person was still moving around. I cracked my eyes open just a little and saw legs standing right at the edge of the bed. I immediately shut my eyes again, because in my head I was like, okay, obviously that's my boyfriend. Who else would it be? But then the feeling didn't stop. Whoever it was still just there. So I opened my eyes again, ready to tell him to stop being creepy, and before I could say anything, this man, who was absolutely not my boyfriend, bent down close to my face and screamed. I can still remember his face. I can still remember the sound. And what did I do in that moment of adult courage and dignity? I shoved my head under the pillow like a terrified 5-year-old. Apparently, my brain decided that if I couldn't see it, then it couldn't see me either, which is not a strategy I recommend, but there I was. My boyfriend was exactly where I'd left him, completely relaxed, watching TV in the den like a man who had definitely not just screamed in my face from the spirit realm. I've slept in that room since then, and nothing that intense has happened again. But every now and then, I still get that same feeling, like I'm being watched. Then a few months later, toward the end of summer, something else happened. Not as terrifying, but honestly weird enough to make my stomach drop. My mom called and asked me to drop something off at the house. No problem. I drove all the way over, only to realize my parents had gone out to dinner and nobody was home. Classic. I left what I needed to leave, gave my childhood dog, Bandito, some love, and was about to head out. But he gave me that look. You know the one. The big, pleading, heartbreaking fur eyes. So I caved and decided to make him a little treat in his Kong toy. I filled it with the fancy natural peanut butter, because he is spoiled beyond reason and apparently deserves artisanal snacks while the rest of us grew up on regular peanut butter. I remember setting the Kong on the kitchen counter very clearly, because I did it automatically out of habit. We used to have a tall dog who would counter-surf anything edible, so I placed it far back from the edge without even thinking. Then I laughed to myself because Bandito is a short little guy and couldn't have reached it anyway. After that, I ran to the bathroom. And of course, because he has serious fear of missing out, Bandito followed me in. He was with me the entire time. When we came back into the kitchen, the Kong was on the floor. I just stopped. I know I didn't put it there. Nobody else was in the house, and Bandito had been with me the whole time. Plus, he couldn't have reached the counter even if he'd tried. We both just stared at it for a second. Then he looked at me, I looked at him, and it honestly felt like we were having the exact same thought. Like, what the hell? He recovered faster than I did, obviously, because a peanut butter snack is a peanut butter snack, haunted delivery or not. He just went right over and started happily licking it like none of this was his concern. So that's my story. Maybe there's some explanation for all of it. Maybe old houses settle, brains do weird things when we're half asleep, and peanut butter somehow develops a mind of its own. But I'll tell you this, I definitely believe my sister now, and I definitely don't sleep in that room with the light off. I've believed for a long time that there might be something real about ghosts. That belief did not come out of nowhere. It came from a handful of moments in the house I live in now. A house where, according to what I've been told, 2 people died years ago. The first thing that really unsettled me happened in the kitchen. There were 6 of us there that night, all just standing around the counter, talking. My kitchen has these glossy, reflective panels, so you catch movement easily. At one point, 3 of us looked up at the exact same time and saw this dark shape flash across the doorway. It moved so fast, just a black shadow cutting across the hall. We all froze and looked at each other immediately, because we knew we had seen the same thing. It wasn't light from outside, and it wasn't a reflection playing tricks on us. We saw it move straight past the doorway. The second experience was the one that really stayed with me. For a while, we had already been hearing the stairs creak at odd hours, along with what sounded like footsteps going up and down when nobody else was there. One night, a few of us decided, half joking and half serious, to do our own little ghost hunt. We split into groups, and I went into the living room with my friend and my younger cousin. It was completely dark in there, the kind of dark where you cannot even see your own hand. My cousin was nervous enough that he just sat beside me with his fingers pressed over his ears. My friend was standing farther away, on the other side of the room. We started asking questions into the darkness, feeling ridiculous because, obviously, nothing was happening. Then I said, mostly to fill the silence, "I'm going to whistle the start of a tune, and if anyone's here, you finish it." I whistled the opening of that old Western theme from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The moment I stopped, I heard the end of the tune whistled back to me. It came from the corner behind my shoulder, loud and clear, from a place where none of us were standing. My cousin definitely did not know the tune, and my friend had no idea what song I was even trying to whistle. We just sat there stunned. It is one of those moments I can still replay perfectly in my head. There was another experience too, though this one I try to look at more carefully. When I was in the hospital going through chemotherapy, I saw my great-gran, who had died when I was very young, and I also saw my aunt, who had passed away at 16. I had never actually met my aunt in life, so that shook me. Even so, I can admit that stress, illness, and treatment can do strange things to the mind. So I hold that memory a little differently. It meant something to me, but I also know there could be another explanation. Then there was the time I had just brought home my dog, back when he was still a tiny puppy. He was lying quietly on the sofa, completely relaxed, when all at once he jumped up and started growling toward the hallway. Not playful barking either. This was low, serious, warning growling. His body changed instantly, like he was squaring up to something I could not see. Then he barked sharply, ran over, climbed onto me, and just stared toward the living room doorway without moving. I checked the hall, the living room, the rest of the house, and there was nobody there. He is older now, and in all these years since, I have never seen him react that way again. So when people ask whether I think ghosts are real, the honest answer is this: I do not know for certain, but I have experienced enough things that I cannot easily dismiss. Maybe there are explanations for some of them, maybe for all of them. But when you are the one standing in the room, hearing the sound, seeing the shape, feeling the air change around you, it becomes much harder to laugh it off. And even now, I still find myself wondering what exactly was in that house with us. You know, when I was a teenager in the mid-90s, I lived near the foot of a mountain, and there was this quiet little spot my friends and I loved going to at night. It was not some intense hike or anything dramatic. We would start from my friend Ryan's house, walk maybe half a mile through a neighborhood, and then take this short dirt path through the trees that opened into a field. From there, you could look out over the whole city, all the lights spread out below you, and on clear nights, the stars were incredible. Behind the field, there was a pasture, and beyond that, thick trees climbing up the mountain. It always felt hidden and peaceful, like our own place. One night, Ryan and I were sitting there talking like we always did, and almost right away something felt off. It was this strange, steady feeling that someone was sitting just behind us. Not far at all, maybe a couple of feet away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, and Ryan did too. We noticed each other doing it, but neither of us said anything because what were we supposed to say? There was no one there. Still, I remember feeling, just for a second, like I could almost make out a young guy sitting there with his knees pulled up, just quietly watching us. It did not feel threatening exactly. It felt more like curiosity, like whoever or whatever it was had joined us without being invited. We tried to ignore it and kept talking, but that feeling never really went away. Then, after maybe an hour, I heard something behind us. It sounded like someone standing up, and right after that I heard what sounded like a handful of pebbles dropping onto the ground all at once. I started to turn around, and before I could even make sense of it, this huge, dark, blurry shape rushed right up in front of my face. It was like a black mass, almost fuzzy around the edges, and it made the most awful sound I have ever heard. Not like an animal I knew. It sounded vicious, like something snarling and grinding its teeth right at me. I froze for a second, just staring at it. Then I looked at Ryan and said, "Run." So we ran. We tore back down that little path through the trees, and it was pitch black. The ground was uneven and cut up from years of rain, and I was half running, half stumbling, trying not to break an ankle. My whole body wanted to sprint and slam on the brakes at the same time. Then I stepped on a thick, dry branch, and it cracked so loudly it sounded like a gunshot. I swear my heart nearly stopped. When we finally burst out of the trees and back near the houses, it felt like we had crossed into safety. We were still shaken though, so instead of going straight home, we ended up at this old park halfway down the hill. That was another place we used to hang out. There were these swings facing the road, and beyond the road was a steep wooded valley. If you looked one way, you could still see the city lights. If you looked the other, you could see the mountain. Planes would come in low along the flight path, so sometimes we would just sit there and watch them. We sat on the swings trying to process what had just happened. That was when Ryan told me that right after the pebble sound, a bottle had flown right past his ear. He said it was so close he could hear that spinning whistle and feel the air move against his skin. It had come from the direction of the pasture. I told him about the black shape that had rushed my face, but he said he had not seen that part at all. I turned, but it was too dark to see anything. By then, the adrenaline had completely taken over. I was shaking, my vision had narrowed, and time had that strange, slow-motion feeling people talk about. We did not hesitate. We ran all the way home without stopping. The next day, in broad daylight, we got our nerve back and decided to go retrace everything. Human logic, you know? Terrified at night, detectives by noon. We went first to the park to see what could have made that crashing sound. Near the swings, close to a patch of long grass by the fence, we found half a brick. Nothing else nearby made sense, so we figured that must have been what hit the ground. What I could not understand was how something that loud had not left a clear mark. Then we went back up to the field. Once we found the place where we had been sitting, there was not much there, just open grass and, a few yards away, a bottle lying exactly where it would have landed if it had come from the pasture and flown past Ryan's head. The pebble sound was harder to explain. We did not find pebbles, but we did find little bits of broken glass pressed into the dry mud. I remember standing there, wondering how that glass had gotten embedded like that. There had not been any rain overnight, at least not that I remembered, so it did not make much sense. It was one of those tiny details that stayed with me because it felt wrong. And then later, I remembered something else. A long time before that night, I had gone up to the same field with another friend. I was sitting down looking at the city, and he was standing maybe 15 meters behind me, facing up toward the mountain. Out of nowhere, he said, in a completely normal voice, "Run." I asked him why, and then he said it again, louder this time, "Run," and took off. Afterward, he told me he had seen a dark shape, not clearly human, not clearly anything, floating down over the trees from higher up the mountain. At the time, I did not put much stock in it, but after what happened with Ryan, that memory came back to me in a very different way. What still stays with me is this. It never really felt like whatever was there wanted to hurt us. It felt more like it wanted us gone, like we had gone somewhere we were not supposed to be, and it was making that very clear. As long as we stayed away from that field at night, it seemed like we had nothing to fear. For a long time, I looked back on it with this strange mix of fear and excitement. It felt like we had brushed up against something we could not explain. I did lose my favorite nighttime hangout after that, though. And honestly, that may have been the point. I need you to believe me when I say this really happened, because even now, more than a year later, I still get shaken thinking about it. I still hate sleeping alone. I'm not being dramatic either. I mean, I genuinely haven't spent a full night by myself since then. For most of my life, I shared a room with my sister, so being alone at night was never something I had to get used to. There were a few rare times when she stayed at a friend's place or went out of town, and even though I was always nervous, nothing bad ever happened. I'd be scared, sure, but eventually I'd fall asleep and wake up fine. Then one week, after I'd been exposed to COVID, my family thought it would be smarter for me to isolate in my mom's room for a while. My mom moved into my room with my sister, and I stayed in hers. At first, I was uneasy about being alone at night, but after a few days, I actually started feeling proud of myself. I thought maybe I was finally getting over that fear. Then one night, everything changed. My mom's mattress was old and uneven, the kind that leaves you sore if you lie the wrong way. I'm also a light sleeper, so I woke up a few times that night. At one point, I woke up flat on my back because the mattress was digging into me. I turned over, fully awake, just trying to get comfortable and hug the spare pillow. And the second I turned, this awful feeling dropped over me. That's the only way I know how to describe it. It felt like something heavy entered the room all at once, like the air itself changed. I knew, with this horrible certainty, that something was there in the darkest corner of the room, watching me. Not just a creepy feeling, not imagination. It felt real in the deepest part of me, like every nerve in my body knew I wasn't alone. I froze. It wasn't exactly that I couldn't move. It was more like every instinct in me locked up at once. I was overwhelmed with this raw, animal fear, the kind that makes your whole body go cold. And then I heard a voice right near my ear. It said, "I'll take you down with me." I know that sounds strange out of context, but in that moment I immediately thought of hell. That was the first place my mind went. I was terrified beyond anything I'd ever felt before. I just stayed there, completely still, praying over and over in my head until morning. I'm not even especially religious, but I was desperate. And desperation makes people reach for anything. When I finally heard birds outside and saw the first signs of daylight, I got up and ran out of that room. I told my family what happened and made it clear I was not going back in there alone. Someone had to sleep with me. The next night, my sister was in the room from the start, and nothing happened. But after that, keeping the same sleep schedule got hard. She stayed up late, and I was exhausted all day, so eventually I went to bed before she did. That's when things started again. This next part is harder to explain, because I was in that half-asleep state where things can feel slippery and unreal. But I still remember enough to know it frightened me. What my sister told me later was that when she came into the room, I sat up in a panic and asked if she had seen something on the ceiling. She looked and didn't see anything, but I scared her badly enough that she ended up lying there afterward, wondering whether whatever I saw had moved before she opened the door. What I remember is this. I was trying to fall asleep, and when I opened my eyes, there was a dark shape above me on the ceiling. I couldn't make it out clearly, but I had this overwhelming sense that it was a woman, pressed against the ceiling directly over my bed. I remember the door opening. I remember my sister coming in. After that, it all gets blurry. Then there was the sleep paralysis. The last time it happened was during the day. I used to nap in the afternoon, and my bed was positioned under a window with shutters that let in strips of light. Across from the bed was a glossy wooden cabinet that reflected some of that light back. I'd fallen asleep after lunch, and when I woke up, I was in sleep paralysis again. I couldn't move, and I could hear this faint static sound, like a hiss buzzing in the room. By then, after everything that had already happened, I was terrified. I felt trapped, like I was lying there waiting for something to come for me again. I started fighting as hard as I could to move. I could barely manage anything, just one eye opening and closing, my fingers twitching. With that one eye, I looked toward the cabinet where the window's reflection showed through. And I swear I saw dark hands hovering above my head, blocking the reflected light. That was enough to send me into full panic. I kept forcing my body to wake up, forcing myself to move, and when I finally broke out of it, there was nothing there. After that, it stopped. Nothing like it happened again. The only thing I changed was that I started praying more often. I don't know whether that had anything to do with it, and I'm not going to pretend I have an answer. I just know I'm still scared it could come back. Even now, the thought of being alone at night too long makes my chest tighten. So that's what happened to me. I'm telling you exactly as I remember it, because even if some of it sounds impossible, the fear was real. And honestly, that fear stayed with me longer than anything else. I want to tell you something personal, and I guess the best way to say it is that, for a long time, home never really felt peaceful to me. Growing up, I lived with my grandparents, my mom, and my little sister. My mom had MS, and it changed so much about her life. My sister and I stepped into caregiver roles pretty young, and even when we were doing our best, the house always carried this heavy feeling. My mom hated being alone in the attic bedroom. Honestly, I understood why. After high school, when my depression got worse, I ended up drifting in and out of that house a lot. Nights were the hardest for me. I could almost never sleep, so I'd stay up way too late at my computer, playing games, sitting in voice chats, doing whatever I could to avoid being alone with my thoughts. There was always this awful feeling that would creep in late at night, especially around 3 in the morning, like someone was standing just behind me, waiting. I know how strange that sounds, but it felt real every single time. For a while, my uncle stayed in that room with me. He was dealing with more pain than most people could carry. He had lost his baby daughter, and that kind of grief changed him. I watched him become more worn down, more angry, more heartbroken. Eventually, things exploded between him and my grandfather, and they stopped speaking for a long time. After that, he moved out, and, for a little while, the room felt lighter. But my uncle and I stayed close over the years. We worked together, lived together here and there, and he meant more to me than I can explain. He was the kind of man who made you feel seen, the kind of man who protected people without making a show of it. In a lot of ways, he was the father figure I always needed. His name was John, and I still miss him every day. He was killed just days after my 21st birthday. That loss hit me harder than I knew a person could be hit. Our whole family struggled with it, even the ones who had judged him or pushed him aside. People like to call him the black sheep, but the truth is, he had one of the biggest hearts in the family. He was carrying wounds nobody really knew how to help him with. And if I'm being honest, part of why I eventually found forgiveness for him was because I started seeing too much of myself in him. The depression, the substance use, the feeling that you're losing ground inside your own mind. I ended up in a psych ward before I could finally admit that. After he died, I was alone in that attic room again, and I was not okay. I was drowning, really. Depression, suicidal thoughts, self-destruction, all of it. I went back to using distraction as survival. Games, videos, endless noise, anything to keep from hearing my own thoughts. But that feeling came back, worse than ever, like something was watching me. One night, I woke up and saw a figure standing near the box that held John's ashes. It was a large man, pale as chalk, with eyes so dark they didn't even seem real. I can still feel the fear from that moment. It looked at me, and I froze, completely froze. I didn't scream, I didn't move. I just shut my eyes and pretended I had fallen back asleep. I have never fallen asleep faster in my life. To this day, it was the only thing I ever saw in that room that truly terrified me to my core. But that wasn't even the first strange thing. I don't live there anymore. I left, and I never really went back. There was too much pain in that house, too much history, too much damage between me and the rest of the family. I can't even pretend I was easy to live with back then. Loving myself has never come naturally to me. Still, I'll tell you this. The feeling of being watched eventually faded. I live somewhere else now, and it feels safer. There are crosses on the walls, little glass angels around the house. And whether that changes anything or not, it comforts me. That matters. I've heard people say spirits follow my father, and he's fought his own battles with addiction and suicidal thoughts too. Maybe that's why so much of my life has felt shadowed by things I can't explain. Lately, I've struggled again. The depression has gotten sharp in ways that scare me. But I'm still here, and that means something. I refuse to give up. More than anything, I want to become for someone else what my Uncle John was for me. Steady, kind, present. The person who shows up when the world gets dark. I still get afraid sometimes that those old feelings will come back. That sense that something is just behind me, waiting. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But for now, I'm still standing. I'm still trying. And I guess that's the part I want you to hear the most. I'm still here. You know, I grew up in a very strict Southern Baptist family, and anything even remotely paranormal was not something we talked about. If somebody mentioned ghosts or strange experiences, the conversation got shut down almost immediately, like it had never happened. But even as a kid, I always felt like something about me was a little different. One Christmas, my great-aunt came to visit for the holidays. She was one of those people who always had a camera in her hand, snapping pictures of everything, all morning long. Later, I overheard her talking quietly with my mother while they were flipping through the photos. She said, "Look at these pictures of him, honey. You see them too, don't you?" I remember sneaking a look, and all I saw were these little balls of light floating around me in the pictures. To me, they looked like glowing bubbles. I thought they were beautiful. That night, my great-aunt tucked me into bed, and instead of reading me a normal bedtime story, she told me one of her own. It was about a boy who had a special gift, a gift that let him see spirits and help the ones who were frightened or lost. Right before I fell asleep, she kissed my forehead and said, "If you ever find yourself in a place where you feel afraid or trapped, or like something is trying to reach you, remember this. I'm like you. It's a gift, not a curse." I didn't fully understand what she meant back then, but I never forgot it. Years later, when I was a pretty rebellious teenager, I spent the night at my friend Harlan's house. We'd stolen a couple of beers, swiped some cigarettes from his mom's pack on the kitchen table, and decided we were very grown up, obviously. His parents were much older than most of our friends' parents, and their house was this huge old place built in the late 1800s in the historic part of town. They let us have the whole upstairs to ourselves. Late that night, we were taking turns smoking by the window, trying to blow the smoke outside without getting caught. Then all at once, I got that feeling. You know that feeling where the air changes? Like your stomach tightens, the room goes heavy, and every part of you knows you're not alone. I panicked and whispered, "Harlan, your mom knows. She knows what we did." And just as I said it, I saw a woman pass by the bedroom door. She was maybe 10 feet away. She wore an old house dress with an apron, and she moved like she belonged there. I said, "See? I told you." Harlan stared at me and said, "What are you talking about? What woman?" And then we both heard it. A soft humming sound, and then a baby crying. We ran into the hallway, checked every room, and there was no one there. Nothing. No woman. No baby. Nothing at all. We tore downstairs into the kitchen, breathless, and there was Harlan's mother standing at the stove making biscuits and gravy like it was any normal morning. Harlan blurted out, "Mom, what did you need? And who brought the baby?" She just turned, smiled at us in the strangest way, and said, "Breakfast, boys?" We never really talked about what happened. Not that day, not that night. We just went to bed and acted like maybe we hadn't heard what we heard, and maybe I hadn't seen what I saw. But that woman came to me in a dream that night. She was devastated, just grieving in a way I can't even properly explain. In the dream, she was crying so hard it felt like her sorrow was pouring into me. I never clearly saw what had happened, only that she had lost someone, and the grief was tied to a child and to that house. She visited me 3 more times over the years. The last time was the night before my first daughter was born. In that dream, she was calm for the first time. She told me I'd been given a responsibility, that this child's safety and well-being had to come before everything else. She warned me not to repeat her mistakes. She told me to choose friends wisely, choose partners wisely, and always put my child first. After a while, life moved on, and I stopped thinking much about those dreams. I packed them away somewhere in the back of my mind, along with the feelings that came with them. Then this morning, right at 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Harlan. He said, "You are never going to believe this. They tore down my childhood home today, and under the front porch, they found an unmarked grave, a woman and her child." And I just sat there, completely still. Because in that moment, every dream, every feeling, every strange thing I had tried to explain away came rushing back at once. And deep down, I knew she hadn't been trying to scare me all those years. She'd been trying to be found. I've only told one other person this story before, and you know that look people give you when they're trying very hard not to say, "You've completely lost it." That was the look. Honestly, I couldn't even blame him. If someone told me this story, I'd probably struggle with it too. The strange part is, I'm not really the kind of person who goes looking for paranormal explanations. I never was. Back then, I was even more skeptical than I am now. I brushed off anything supernatural as nonsense people use to make sense of grief or fear. But this stayed with me. It still drifts back into my mind every now and then, and every time it does, I end up sitting with the same question all over again. A little background first. My father passed away almost 3 years ago. It was sudden, brutally sudden. He had a cardiac arrest on his way home, and just like that, he was gone. Earlier that same day, I'd had lunch with both my parents. Everything felt normal, ordinary, which somehow made it all even harder to accept. The night after he died, I stayed in my old room. There was a pull-out sofa in there by then, and that's where I slept. My mother was in the next room. We were both drained in that way grief drains you, where your body gives up before your mind does. So even though it was still pretty early, we both went to bed. The apartment was completely still. The windows were shut, the street outside was quiet, and there was that heavy silence that only seems to happen after something terrible. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark, staring toward the half-open door, thinking the kind of thoughts people think when their world has been split in two. Sometime close to midnight, I heard what sounded like the door shifting wider, like someone had gently pushed it and stepped into the room. Not rushed, not loud, just careful, quiet. I thought it was my mother checking on me, so I lifted my head and looked. There was no one there. I remember squinting into the dark, trying to make sense of it, and eventually convincing myself I was overtired and imagining things. So I settled back down. Then maybe a minute later, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. Slow, muffled footsteps on the wooden floor. The kind of sound someone makes when they're trying not to wake you. They moved across the room, steady and deliberate, until it sounded like they were right near the foot of the sofa. And then I heard it. A distinct knock. Actually, 2 or 3 quick knocks against the wooden base behind me. Sharp enough that I felt it in my whole body. If you've ever slept on one of those old pull-out couches, you know they don't just make that sound on their own. Not like that. Not unless someone actually hits them. And here's the part that still unsettles me most. I wasn't overwhelmed with fear. I should have been, right? But I wasn't. I felt strangely calm. Not happy, not exactly comforted, just calm. Like whatever had happened wasn't there to hurt me. At some point after that, I finally fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up and immediately thought about it. I remember telling myself, that was bizarre, but grief does strange things to people. I figured my mind had played tricks on me. Later that day, I mentioned it to my mother. I told her I thought I'd imagined someone walking through the room and knocking on my bed. She just looked at me and said she'd been awake too. She said it sounded exactly like someone had come into the apartment, walked through to my room, stopped there for a moment, gone back through hers, touched the familiar things he always touched, and then left. That was the part I couldn't explain away anymore. If it had just been me, I would have dismissed it. Exhaustion, shock, grief, some half-dream state. Human brains are messy little drama factories at the best of times. But my mother heard it too. The same sounds, in the same order, at the same time. So I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count. Maybe it was some bizarre coincidence. Maybe grief can echo in two people at once. Or maybe, just maybe, he came back one last time to say goodbye in the quiet language of the home he knew by heart. You know, I think the first time I realized something unusual was happening, I was about 7 years old. My mom had this habit of writing things down, and one morning she wrote down a dream I'd told her about. In it, I described several relatives I had never met, people I later learned had passed away before I was even born. At the time, I didn't understand what that meant. I just knew I had seen them. As I got older, it stopped feeling like it was only happening in dreams. I started noticing things in everyday life too. This past year especially, it's been intense. I've heard rhythmic drumming coming from just beyond the fence in our backyard when no one was there. I saw a man standing in my kitchen dressed like he'd stepped out of another era, in an old-fashioned hat and dark suit. Another night, I looked toward my bedroom doorway and saw an older man standing there, wearing a pale blue mask, just watching quietly. Those are only a few of the moments, but what's different now, and honestly what has shaken me most, is that my children have started seeing and hearing things too. One winter evening, not long after we got home from Christmas at my parents' house, I was about to let the dog out into the yard. Snow was falling. The house was completely still. No TV on. Everyone else asleep. Then both my son and I heard a teenage boy's voice, clear as day, say, "I wouldn't let him go out there." We both froze. My son was terrified. I really did feel for him, but at the same time, I had this strange sense of relief, because for once, someone else had heard what I've heard for years. A couple of times since then, when no one else was home, he's heard a voice say, "Hey, Mom," like someone was trying to get my attention. My daughter has had her own experience too. One night before bed, she casually asked me who the boy in the hallway was. I hadn't seen anyone, but she described him so clearly, right down to what he was wearing. What struck me most was how calm she was. She wasn't scared. She said it like she was asking about an ordinary visitor passing through the house. Not every experience has been calm, though. A few years ago, when my parents came to stay with us after we moved into our new home, my mom and I were up late talking in the living room, just catching up the way we always did. Then both of us turned toward the kitchen at the exact same moment. A solid black figure, shaped like a man, walked into the room. It paused near the office, turned its head toward us, and then continued down the hallway toward the children's bedrooms. My mom and I just looked at each other. We didn't even have to ask. We both knew we had seen the same thing. I immediately ran down the hall and checked on my kids. They were both asleep. Nothing was there. But I was so shaken I ended up praying over them and checking on them again and again through the night. What's hardest now is trying to make sense of all of this while my children are becoming part of it too. It's one thing to carry these experiences by yourself. It's another when your kids start stepping into that same strange world and you don't have answers for them. Later that same night, I saw what looked like an ancient book suspended there for a moment, covered in strange symbols I couldn't read. But the image that has stayed with me the most came just a few nights before my parents died. Something stood in my bedroom doorway, tall and still, and the only way I can describe it is that it resembled Anubis. It wasn't aggressive. It felt watchful, like it was studying me, trying to understand something. I remember saying, "No," out loud firmly, and after that, it slowly drifted back behind the door and disappeared. I know how unbelievable all of this sounds. Trust me, I hear myself saying it, and I know how it must land. But it happened. Every bit of it felt real. More than anything, I'm tired. I'm tired of not understanding why these things keep appearing, what they want, or whether they need something from me. And if they do, I don't know how to help. I definitely don't know how to explain any of this to my children when I barely understand it myself. Still, saying it out loud does help. It makes it feel a little less heavy somehow. My next step is to put up cameras and start documenting what I can. Maybe then I'll have something concrete to show, something beyond memory and fear and doubt. Right now, I just want answers, and maybe, finally, a little peace. I want to tell you about something that happened to me a while back, and honestly, I still can't fully explain it. I was out with two friends on one of their family's farms in rural North Carolina. The land is huge, well over 100 acres, and it's been in their family for generations. Not far from the main farmhouse, there's this old abandoned house that nobody in the family really claims to know much about. It's just always been there, empty, like a place time forgot. The story that's been passed down is that the people who once lived there were involved in making illegal liquor during Prohibition. Supposedly, there was some kind of violent dispute, and the house was shot up. After that, it was left behind, furniture and belongings and all. Nobody has paperwork or anything official to prove it, but there are old bullet holes in the walls, and even bullets still lodged in the wood. In the family, it's pretty much understood that something terrible happened there, and that nobody inside walked away from it. So with all of that in mind, here's what happened. It was a Saturday night, October 16th, and we were sitting around talking when the abandoned house came up. Both of my friends had been inside before, and I said I wanted to see it for myself. They agreed to take me, so we headed out. It was maybe a 15-minute walk from the main house. When we got there, the place looked rough. It was a small 2-story house, maybe 800 square feet at most, and even in the moonlight, you could see how badly it had fallen apart. Parts of the porch had collapsed, the walls were damaged, and the whole place just felt tired and broken. The only door we could get through was already standing open, which didn't exactly make us feel better, but we went in anyway. My friends told me that since their last visit, somebody had stapled tarps over a few of the interior doorways. We looked around the first room and took a couple of pictures. The stairs to the second floor were right there, and we shined a light up to take a look. But the floor above seemed way too unstable to risk it. So we stayed downstairs. Then we moved toward the room just off the entryway, on the left side. That doorway had one of the tarps hanging over it. I held the flashlight while one of my friends pulled back a corner of the tarp. The second he did, this puff of air came out from the room, and with it came the worst smell. It was a rotten, heavy smell, like something had died in there and been left too long. It hit us so hard that we honestly thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped inside and decomposed. We pulled the rest of the tarp down and stepped into what looked like it had once been the living room. But the strange part was, there was almost nothing in there. The room was mostly empty. Just a few old glass jars with fake flowers stuck in them, and then those same bullet holes all over the walls. Nothing else that really stood out. We took a few pictures anyway, including the one that ended up becoming the reason I still think about that night. After that, we checked the rest of the downstairs, a small kitchen, a utility room, a couple of other spaces, and then we headed back to the farmhouse. At that point, nothing especially weird had happened. Creepy, sure, but nothing we couldn't brush off. Later, we sat down at the kitchen table and started going through the photos on the phone. We were laughing a little, talking about how unsettling the place had been, until we got to the picture taken in that living room. And that's when everything changed. I was there when the picture was taken. I'm in the photo myself. I was standing right there with my friend Mason, who took it, from the moment he snapped it to the moment we looked at it less than half an hour later. Nobody edited anything. Out of all the pictures we took that night, maybe 20 or so, that was the only one that looked wrong. We were all shaken by it, and to be honest with you, I still don't know what caused it. Maybe there's some perfectly reasonable explanation for the image distortion. Maybe it was a camera glitch, bad lighting, digital corruption, something technical. I'd love for that to be true. But standing in that old house, smelling something rotten in a room that looked almost untouched, and then later seeing those faces in the photo, it's hard not to wonder if something in that house was still there, watching us. I've always tried to keep an open mind about ghosts and anything paranormal, but I've never been the kind of person to believe things too easily. I've pretty much always felt that unless I see something with my own eyes, I can't fully accept it. Even then, I've never really thought of ghosts as spirits wandering around in the present. To me, it makes more sense that they're more like echoes of another time, almost like little slips in time where the past shows through for a moment. That idea has always seemed more believable to me, because when people talk about ghosts, they're almost never from right now, are they? You don't hear stories about someone seeing a ghost in a hoodie holding a smartphone, and you definitely don't hear much about ghosts from ancient prehistoric times either. Most of the stories seem tied to older periods, and that's part of why I've always wondered if maybe people are catching these strange little glimpses of the past rather than seeing the dead as they are in the present. Anyway, this story came from my grandmother, though I never heard it directly from her myself. She's passed away now, so I'll never be able to ask her about it in her own words, which honestly makes the whole thing feel even more haunting to me. My grandmother, Margaret, was a very quiet, reserved woman. She kept to herself, liked her routines, and was perfectly content sitting in her favorite armchair watching television for hours. She was also incredibly old-fashioned, very proper, and deeply honest. She had absolutely no patience for lying or exaggeration. On top of that, she was the only truly religious person in our family. She went to church every Sunday without fail and kept little religious items around the house. She really wasn't the sort of person you'd imagine telling ghost stories for attention or drama. In fact, she was probably the last person you'd expect. The story itself happened when she was around 40, living with my grandfather, my dad, and my aunt in an old cottage in West Wales. One day, everyone else had gone out, and she was home alone doing the cleaning, vacuuming her way through the house. She went into the living room, and there, completely unexpectedly, she saw a man sitting and looking straight at her. Not a shadow, not some vague shape out of the corner of her eye. She said it was a man, clear as day. What struck her most was the way he was sitting. She described it as odd, almost as if he were leaning against the wall in a way that didn't quite make sense. He just sat there, watching her. She froze in shock for a moment, and then, Once that first stunned second passed, she panicked and ran from the room. When she gathered herself enough to go back, he was gone. Years later, the house was being renovated, and behind that very wall, they discovered an old staircase that had been boarded up and hidden away. It was exactly where she had seen the man. Suddenly, the strange way he'd been sitting made a kind of eerie sense. If the staircase had once been there, then perhaps he hadn't been leaning against a wall at all. Maybe he'd been sitting on one of the steps. That part is what stays with me. Out of all the details, that's the one I keep coming back to. And really, what reason would she have had to make it up, especially if she hardly ever spoke about it? Then there's that staircase. The fact that they later uncovered it in the exact spot where she'd seen him sitting. I mean, what are the chances of that? So that's the story. It's not the longest or the most dramatic, but it's always stayed with me. For me, it's one of those stories that gives just enough pause to make you wonder. I'm still on the fence, honestly. Part of me still wants my own experience, something undeniable that would settle it in my mind once and for all. Until then, I suppose I'll keep wondering. I want to tell you about a place I lived in back in 1989 in Hobart, Tasmania. It was this enormous, old house on a street near the edge of the city, one of those places that seemed to carry its whole history in the walls. People said it was one of the earliest homes built in Hobart, and there were stories that two sisters had once lived and died there long before any of us came along. From the moment I moved in, the house felt strange. Not threatening exactly, just heavy. Like it had seen too much and remembered all of it. It had a reputation too. People around Hobart knew it as a kind of legendary party house, partly because of where it was, and partly because it was big enough to hold half the city's misfits in one night. And in Hobart, if you were already considered a fringe dweller, you were really out there. What made it even stranger was how neglected it seemed. When we finally went to the real estate office to make our tenancy official, the agent basically laughed and said they hadn't inspected the place in more than 10 years. Imagine hearing that about the house you just moved into. It was so casual, so absurd, that it actually made me wonder whether someone had gone in years earlier, seen something they couldn't explain, and decided never to return. And then there was the inside of the house itself. It wasn't just furnished. It was as if someone had been living there one minute and vanished the next. There was food still in the kitchen cupboards, blankets folded on beds, clothes hanging in wardrobes, little decorative things scattered around like the place was still waiting for its owners to come home. Some of the food was so old it dated back to the 1960s. That alone was unsettling. Naturally, the place came with stories. People said a man named Crazy Rob had died there in the 60s, back when the house had apparently already earned its reputation as a wild gathering place. There were also rumors that it had once been home to one of Hobart's earliest black magic groups, and that Rob had been at the center of it. Now, whether any of that was true is another matter, but those were the kinds of stories that followed the house around. Not long after we moved in, my flatmate went from room to room taking down black crosses and open umbrellas that had been hanging from the ceilings. That should have told us something probably, but at the time, none of us were exactly living in a state of heightened spiritual sensitivity. We'd heard the house was haunted, sure, but we mostly brushed it off. Then one night, about a week or so after I moved in, something happened that I still remember clearly. I'd been out, and when I came back, I walked in through the front door and glanced into the living room to see if any of my friends were there. The room was empty. In the middle of the dining table sat this little handmade necklace someone had left behind, strung together from fishing line and small seashells. And just as I looked into the room, that necklace moved. It slid right across the table on its own and then shot off the edge, landing on the floor a short distance away. I know how that sounds. But what's odd is that I wasn't terrified. I didn't get the feeling of anything dark or threatening. It felt almost playful, like there was someone invisible in the room saying, "Hey, watch this. Look what I can do." It was more like being noticed than being frightened. Like something in that house wanted me to know it was there. Back then, none of us were really expecting anything like that. We knew the stories, but we didn't put much stock in them. Still, as time went on, every one of us ended up with at least one story about that house. And the people who lived there after us had their own stories too. These days, the old place has a different nickname, the Winter Palace. From what I understand, it's been used as a recording space for visiting musicians, which somehow suits it. It always felt like the kind of house that wouldn't stop gathering stories just because time had passed. And honestly, I'd be more surprised if strange things weren't still happening there. I want to tell you about something that happened to me years ago in Hobart, Tasmania, and to this day, I still can't fully explain it. This wasn't a ghost story exactly. There were no monsters, no haunted house, nothing like that. But it was one of those moments that felt so strange, so outside the ordinary, that I've never been able to file it away as just normal life. Back in the late 1980s, I went for a walk up on Knocklofty, the bushland hills behind North Hobart. If you know Hobart, you know how easy it is to end up surrounded by trees and silence within minutes. That day, the track was quiet. I hadn't seen another person around, and I was completely on my own. As I was walking, I looked up and saw a man standing right in the middle of the path. He was impossible to miss. He had long hair, a thick beard, and a rough, weathered look about him, like someone who'd been out in the bush for a long time. But it wasn't just how he looked. It was the way he stood there, completely still, waiting. And as I got closer, he kept his eyes locked on me. He didn't move aside. He didn't say a word. He just stared straight into my face. I remember feeling deeply uneasy. My instincts were shouting at me that something wasn't right. I was alone, far enough into the reserve that I suddenly felt foolish for not telling anyone where I was going. You know how your mind can race in moments like that? I started thinking, if this man means harm, no one would even know where to begin looking. So when I passed him, I kept my head down and avoided his gaze. I could feel this intensity coming off him, something almost feral, and I just wanted to get by without provoking anything. I kept walking, half convinced he might start following me. After I'd gone a fair distance, I finally worked up the nerve to turn around. And what I saw stopped me cold. He was still standing in exactly the same spot, but now he was smiling. Not just smiling, really. He looked absolutely radiant, almost triumphant, like he was delighted by some private miracle. And all over him, on his arms, his shoulders, even on his head, were tiny, wild birds. There were dozens of them. Little native birds were hopping and fluttering all over him, as if he were part of the landscape, as if they belonged there with him. They didn't seem frightened. They weren't darting in and out the way wild birds usually do. They were gathered on him in this impossible, calm, almost enchanted way. I just stood there staring. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And he kept looking at me, smiling with this wild, proud expression, like he knew exactly how unbelievable it was. For a second, I think I may even have smiled back, just out of pure shock. I didn't feel safe enough to go any closer, though. Whatever was happening, however beautiful or bizarre it was, I still felt that same edge of fear. So I turned around and headed home, stunned and excited and desperate to tell someone what I'd seen. When I got back, I told a friend straight away, and he completely brushed it off. Didn't believe a word of it. After that, I let it go. I stopped trying to explain it, because there's not much you can say when someone has already decided you must be exaggerating or imagining things. Then, years later, I brought it up again. And this time, that same friend said something like, "Actually, I've heard other people mention a man up there like that. They said strange things happened around him too." I started thinking of him as the Birdman of Knocklofty, though I suppose that sounds a bit dramatic. Still, I don't know what else to call him. I haven't been back there in a long time, but every now and then I think about that man, standing silently on the track, as if he'd stepped out of nowhere, and I wonder whether he still appears to unsuspecting walkers now and then. Maybe he was just someone with an uncanny gift with birds. Maybe he was a showman. Maybe it was something stranger than that. I honestly don't know. What I do know is this: there was nothing ordinary about that afternoon, and I've never forgotten it. You know, back when I was in art school in the early 90s, I had this terrible habit of leaving everything until the final stretch. Some people call it my process. So before one big assessment, I stayed up for nearly 3 nights straight, completely wrapped up in finishing my work at the last possible moment. At the time, I was living in this old house that already had a reputation for being haunted. Nothing dramatic had happened to me before then, not really. But there was one thing that always got under my skin. Every time I passed the back door, it would rattle like someone outside was trying the handle. The strange part was, there was never anyone there. And the floor in that part of the house was solid concrete, so it was not as if footsteps or movement inside could have made the door shake. It just did. One night, while I was hurrying past on my way upstairs, I happened to glance through the kitchen window. And there, in the middle of the kitchen wall, I saw a figure sitting there as casually as if gravity meant nothing at all. For a split second, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then it hit me. It was me, or something that looked exactly like me. This figure was wearing a dark blue suit, with a crisp shirt and neat short hair, and it was staring straight at me with this unsettling grin, like it knew something I did not. That part is what stayed with me most. Not just the resemblance, but the expression. It felt personal, familiar in the worst possible way. The odd thing is, because I already believed the house was haunted, I was strangely prepared for something uncanny to happen. I had come to expect the door to shake, to feel that little chill of unease. So when I saw this, double, I was frightened, of course, but not as overwhelmed as I might have been otherwise. I had always been curious about paranormal stories, and I had read enough to know about doppelgangers, those ghostly doubles said to imitate the living. I also knew the folklore around them was grim, that seeing one was supposed to be a bad sign. So I made a conscious choice right then. I did not stop. I did not react. I did not give it any more attention than I had to. I just went straight back upstairs and buried myself in my work. Honestly, the deadline probably saved me. I was so obsessed with finishing that assessment that I pushed the whole thing to the back of my mind. I remember thinking I would come back to it later, when life felt quieter. Then, like people do, I moved on. I handed in my work, survived the chaos, and summer began. A couple of weeks later, in one of those aimless holiday afternoons, I ended up back at the house and had one of those strange, half-dreaming experiences where you are not quite asleep and not quite awake. I remember lying on my bed, feeling like my mind was drifting farther and farther out, as if I were trying to reach the edge of everything. At the time, I thought it meant something profound. Looking back, I probably just nodded off and dressed it up with imagination. Human beings do love giving sleep weirdness a spiritual branding. Not long after that, my mom, who was always kind in exactly the way I needed, offered to help me find a summer job. She knew I was broke, surviving on scraps, cigarettes, and artistic ambition, which is not exactly a stable financial model. So she took me into the city, and we spent the day going through secondhand shops looking for something smart enough for interviews. She found me this cheap but decent blue pinstripe suit, and then she paid to get my hair cut properly. And the second I looked at my reflection, my stomach dropped. Because standing there in that mirror, with my hair cut short and that blue suit on, I looked exactly like the figure I had seen weeks earlier sitting in the kitchen wall. Exactly. Same clothes, same hair, same overall look. I just stood there, staring at myself, and suddenly that night came rushing back in full detail. It was not just that I resembled the figure, it was that I had become it. Or maybe I always was it, and for one impossible moment, I had seen myself before I got there. I still cannot explain it to you in any neat or satisfying way. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was stress or suggestion, or some strange overlap of memory and imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, I really did see something I was not meant to see yet. Whatever the truth is, I have never forgotten that feeling. That quiet shock of recognizing yourself in a place where you absolutely should not already be. I never really thought of that house as haunted until recently. The other night, I was tucking my son into bed, and it hit me that he is about the same age I was when all of this happened. Funny how memory works. You can carry something around for years without giving it a proper shape, and then one quiet conversation suddenly lines everything up for you. When I was growing up, my mom suffered from terrible nightmares. Not ordinary bad dreams either. She would scream, shout, thrash around, and sometimes wake in such deep panic that she had no idea where she was. One night, she nearly cracked my dad across the head with a heavy lamp she grabbed from the bedside table. Another time, he had to stop her from launching herself straight through the bedroom window. Their room was 2 stories above a concrete path, so that would have ended very badly. Those episodes were such a normal part of my childhood that I got used to them in a way no child really should. I can still remember lying in bed, hearing Mum screaming and Dad trying to wake her, and just thinking, there she goes again, before rolling over and falling back asleep. That was simply life in our house. Then my parents split up when I was around 12, and Dad moved out. We lived in a 2-story place, and my bedroom was the only one downstairs. Since I was the oldest, I felt this strange little burden settle on me, like it was my job to make sure everyone was safe. So every night I would stay up until the rest of the family had gone to bed, and only then would I head downstairs to my room. For 3 nights in a row, the same thing happened. Each night, as I walked down the stairs, the moment my foot landed on the second last step, my mother would suddenly begin one of her screaming episodes upstairs. Every single time. Same step, same instant. And every time I would turn and run back up to her room, saying the same words I had heard my father say so many times before. Wake up. Wake up. It's only a dream. A little while after that, one evening my brother, my sister, my mom and I were all upstairs in the living room. We had just finished watching television and were getting ready for bed when this loud banging started beneath the staircase. Not a little creak or plumbing noise. I mean proper banging, sharp and heavy, coming from the exact spot where my foot had landed on those 3 nights. There was nobody else in the house, and the space under those stairs was far too cramped for a person to be hiding in. The 4 of us just froze. Nobody needed to say a word. We all knew, instantly, that something about it was wrong. We sort of shuffled together into a tight little huddle in the middle of the room and stood there, staring, until it stopped. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, maybe a bit longer, but fear stretches time into something ugly. Even after it ended, none of us wanted to speak. It felt safer somehow not to give it language. Years later, I asked my mom if she remembered that night. She didn't. which honestly makes it worse somehow. Human memory, always performing its cheap little vanishing act. Not long before that, my mom had a few friends over one Friday night, and after some drinks, they decided it would be entertaining to hold a seance. Because apparently adults sometimes get bored and decide to invite nonsense into the house for sport. I joined in, put my finger lightly on the edge of a glass, and closed my eyes. I could feel it moving, and I assumed one of the others was pushing it. But when I opened my eyes, I saw that no one else even had a finger on the glass. Mine was the only one there. Sleeping downstairs by myself, I sometimes woke with this awful feeling that something was in the room with me. I couldn't have told you what it was. I never saw anything clearly, but I felt it, and I felt, with absolute certainty, that it meant me harm. A few times I was so frightened I ran upstairs and spent the rest of the night in my younger brother's room. My bedroom had a door that opened into what we called the basement, though it wasn't really a basement. The house was built into the side of a steep hill, so underneath was this long, low storage space with my dad's little workbench at one end. Beyond part of it, there was exposed earth and shadow where the slope of the hill pressed in close. Even in daylight, that place had an atmosphere I hated. Bare ground, stale air, a kind of hush that didn't feel empty so much as occupied. That door stood right beside my bed. Sometimes, especially at night, I would feel as though something was behind it. Not just a childish fear of the dark, but a distinct presence, a waiting thing. I never had the courage to open that door when the feeling was strongest. During the day, I played in that room often enough, but even then, I never left it comfortably. There was always this sense of being unwelcome, of stepping away from a place that had only tolerated me while I was in motion and in sunlight. Whenever my grandmother came to stay, she slept in my room because it was the only one large enough for a spare bed. Years after we moved out, she told me something she had kept to herself because she didn't want to frighten me when I was younger. When she was a little girl, sometime around the early 1900s, she had been with family out in the bush near a campfire. One of her young cousins, or perhaps a distant relative, was standing too close to the flames, and her long dress caught fire. In the panic to save her, someone grabbed the child and threw her into a nearby creek to put the flames out. But the shock of the freezing water, mixed with the terror and pain, killed her almost instantly. My grandmother told me that one night, while sleeping in my room, she woke to see that girl standing beside the bed. The girl was smiling. She said, "Don't worry, Nana. I'm all right now. I'm fine." What struck me later was that this child would never have known my grandmother as Nana. That was what everyone called her in our house because she had a huge family and grandchildren everywhere, and the name just stuck. That is why I never believed, not really, that it was truly the girl herself. I thought it was something else, something wearing a familiar shape, borrowing a story, using the name it had heard around the house. Something that understood just enough to unsettle. And that was always the feeling in that place. Not sadness, not even grief. Something meaner than that. Something that wanted to disturb, to press on fear the way a bruise gets pressed just to hear the reaction. Even now, after all these years, I still dream about that house. We only lived there a short while, but it stayed with me. One dream in particular has never left me. In it, I was standing again at the top of the stairs, surrounded by a darkness that felt thicker than real darkness. You know the kind, I think. The sort that seems deep enough to hide darker things inside it. I looked down toward the landing, and there, in a small pool of cold white light, was the exact spot where my foot had landed on those nights when my mother started screaming. I looked away for a second and thought, almost casually, you know what would make this truly terrifying? If something appeared there. And when I looked back, there was a doll. So when I tell you I never used to think of that house as haunted, I mean it. I spent most of my life treating those memories like separate incidents, Hello, my friends of the Paranormal M channel. It's been really cold lately, and I've been looking forward to finally sitting down with my microphone to share some mysterious experiences from around the world. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Thank you so much for always listening and supporting the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's dive into today's stories. So, my dad passed away a little over a year ago, and our dog, well, she never actually saw him after it happened. So in her world, nothing had ended. He was just gone. A couple weeks after we lost him, it was just me and her at home. Quiet house. One of those heavy, muffled days where even normal sounds feel too loud. At first, she seemed fine. Then, out of nowhere, she started acting wrong. Not naughty wrong, not zoomies wrong, more like unsettled, like she didn't know where her body was supposed to be. She kept shifting from one resting spot to another. Couch, then the hallway, then the kitchen, then under a chair, then under this little side table like she was trying to fold herself into the smallest shadow she could find. I remember laughing a little at first, because dogs do weird things, right? I figured she was entertaining herself, but then I called her. Nothing. I called again, sweet voice, the way I always do. Still nothing. I even did that little clap and "come on girl" thing. She didn't even flick an ear. That's when I got this tight feeling in my chest, like, okay, something's going on. I walked toward the kitchen and found her under this small table, pressed low to the floor. Her eyes were wide open, too wide, and she was staring at the empty air near the doorway like there was something standing there, something she was tracking. But there was nothing. No bug, no shadow, no sound, just regular kitchen. Except it didn't feel regular. She didn't move her head the way dogs do when they're curious. It was more like she was frozen in one long, careful stare, like she was studying something that didn't make sense to her. And this didn't last a few minutes. It lasted basically the whole day. She'd bolt from one hiding place to another, like she'd suddenly realized she wasn't safe there anymore. She'd wedge herself under furniture, then go still again, staring at whatever she was staring at. Fear and confusion, then silence. Over and over. Every time she hid, she stared at the same kind of nothing. Some spot in the room where the air looked completely normal to me, but she treated it like it could move. What made it worse was the atmosphere in the house. It's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but it felt off. Like the air had a restlessness to it. At one point, a couple really light things on a shelf shifted, just slightly, like a draft had brushed them. And yeah, it was windy outside, but the windows were shut. I checked them, twice. Still, every once in a while it felt like a faint current moved through the room, like the house exhaled when it wasn't supposed to. And I'll be honest, watching her like that got to me. Not in a horror movie way, more in this quiet, skin-prickling way where you start second-guessing every corner of your own home. Hours later, my mom came back. Normally, if one of us steps out for 5 minutes and returns, our dog acts like we've come back from war. Full body wiggles, jumping, spinning, the whole celebration. If we're gone for half a day, she practically climbs up our chest like, "Where have you been? I thought you vanished forever." But that day, my mom walked in and our dog didn't greet her, didn't rush the door, didn't even lift her head. She stayed tucked under that little table in the kitchen, staring. Nothing. Not even a glance. So I finally went into the kitchen, reached under the table, and gently slid her out. I carried her into the dining room and set her down nearby. She didn't lie down. She sat, rigid, alert, near the wall. And then she started staring again. Only this time, the spot she stared at was close to where my mom was sitting. But she wasn't looking at my mom. It was like she was looking through her, or past her. Like whatever had her attention was positioned just off to the side, in the space between us. My mom noticed immediately, She got quiet, then tried again. Soft voice, arms open. "Come here, sweetheart." Our dog wanted to go to her. You could see it. Her body leaned forward. Her paws shifted like she was trying to decide. But she wouldn't stand up. She just kept staring, tense, like she was afraid that if she broke eye contact, something would happen. And then, this is the part I can't forget. She suddenly shook her head, fast. 2 or 3 sharp shakes, like something had brushed her nose and she was trying to fling it away. Like she'd felt a touch she didn't understand. The second she stopped shaking, it was like a switch flipped. She launched herself up, ran straight to my mom, and climbed onto her legs, pressing in for comfort like she'd been holding her breath all day. She looked relieved. Still shaken, but relieved. Like whatever had her pinned in that strange trance had finally released her. And I remember sitting there thinking, she was scared all day, but she couldn't stop watching it. I don't know what she saw. I don't even know if saw is the right word. All I know is that for one long day, my dog behaved like something unfamiliar had entered our home, and she was the only one who understood it was there. So, when I first moved into this little room I'm renting, I knew something was off the second I stepped inside. It's small, like properly small, but somehow it had 3 huge mirrors, and one of them was a full-body mirror that made the place look twice as big. Which sounds nice in theory, right? Except, in my Southeast Asian background, mirrors are kind of a big deal. Like we're always told don't put a mirror facing the bed, and definitely don't let it face the door. And guess what this room had? Yep, the biggest mirror was angled so it could catch the doorway and the bed. It was like the room was set up to break every "don't do this" rule I grew up hearing. From the very first week, my sleep got weird. I'd fall asleep, but it never felt restful. And the dreams, those heavy, unsettling dreams that cling to you even after you wake up. The only way I could sleep without feeling totally creeped out was leaving a little light on. My landlord, Mr. Somchai, was really strict about electricity though. He'd always remind me, "Lights off at night, okay?" He usually went to bed around 11 p.m., so what I started doing was, honestly, kind of sneaky. I'd turn everything off when he was still awake, then once the house got quiet, I'd flick on my bedside lamp like I was running some secret nighttime operation. But one night, I was exhausted. Like the kind of tired where you don't even have the energy to be scared. I told myself, it's fine, just sleep, don't overthink it. And I passed out with the light off. That's when it happened. In the dream, I woke up and immediately felt that panic, like something wasn't right. I reached for the lamp and clicked it on. Nothing. No light, no glow, just dead. So I sat up and tried again, clicking it over and over, and still nothing. That's when I got out of bed and went to the main switch near the door. I flipped it. Also nothing. And the thing is, the bed was positioned so that when you stand at the door, you can see straight onto it. So I'm standing there in the dark, staring into this too familiar room, and my eyes adjust just enough for me to see there's someone lying in my bed. At first I thought, oh, someone broke in. Then I saw the shape more clearly. It was me. Same hair, same shirt, same posture, like I was looking at an exact copy of myself asleep under my blanket. My whole body went cold, like the air had turned into ice water. And my first thought wasn't even logical. It was just instinct, like something ancient in my brain went, wrong, get back now. So I rushed toward the bed and tried to throw myself back into my body, like you hear in those ghost stories. And the moment I did, I started trying to wake up. But I couldn't. I tried to scream and nothing came out. I tried to force my eyes open, and it felt like pushing against a wall. That horrible feeling of being stuck, like you're trapped behind your own face. And then, I woke up for real. I sat straight up, gasping like I'd been underwater. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And the first thing I did, shaking, sweaty palms and all, I clicked my lamp on. It worked. I jumped up and flipped the main light switch. Also worked. Everything was normal. Because it felt too real. Like the room hadn't let me go yet. I didn't sleep after that. I just stayed awake until morning, watching those mirrors like they were watching me back. Later that day, I asked Mr. Somchai if I could rearrange things, cover the mirrors, shift the bed so it wasn't lined up with the door anymore. I tried to sound casual, but I'm pretty sure my face said everything. He paused, looked at me for a second, then just nodded. If it helps you sleep, sure. So I covered 2 mirrors with fabric, turned the big one to face the wall, and moved the bed so I couldn't see the doorway from where I lay down. And I swear, that night felt different. The air felt calmer, the room felt quieter, and the dreams, those sticky, unsettling dreams, stopped. I still sleep with a little light on sometimes, though. Not bright, just enough to remind myself I'm awake and here. Because in my culture, there's also this belief that you shouldn't sleep with your feet pointing straight at the door, like you're already being carried out. People say it makes it easier for your spirit to get pulled away, like it can be taken out through the doorway. I don't know if I believe every part of that, but I know what I felt in that room before I moved things. And honestly, mirrors have always freaked me out, even as a kid. Like, you ever put 2 mirrors facing each other and you get that endless tunnel effect? That infinite loop that looks like it goes on forever? Yeah, no thanks. Anyway, I'm curious. Are there any superstitions you still follow, even a little? Like habits you swear don't matter, but you still do them, just in case? Hey, so I'm Eli. I'm 22, and there's this thing my sleep does to me that I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's the false awakening loop. You know, that awful trick where you wake up, you're sure you're awake, and then you realize you're still dreaming. And then you wake up again, and it just keeps going. Before this week, my worst run was something like 6 or 7 in a row. I'd open my eyes, try to sit up, swing my legs over the side of the bed, and my body would feel like it was packed with wet sand. I'd reach for the lamp. Click. Nothing. Every time, the light wouldn't work. That was my test. If the lamp didn't turn on, I knew I was still trapped in it. One time, the loop came with extras. Like my brain decided, oh, you're already scared? Cool, let's decorate. There was this floating dark shape, almost like a smudged out balloon, and then a dog-shaped shadow that moved like smoke. The worst part? When I finally actually woke up, I swear I still saw them for a second, like they'd followed me across the line. Today was worse. I lost count. It just stacked. Wake up, same room, same angle on my pillow, same weight on my chest, same sense that something was nearby, watching from just out of sight. I've gotten used to the paralysis part, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say. At this point, I can kind of push myself to move if I focus hard enough. Like I can slide an arm or roll my shoulder, but it's not real movement, not clean. It's like steering a heavy object with your thoughts. And the more I force it, the more my brain goes, "Great, you're active again," and drops me right back into sleep, into another wake-up that isn't real. This time I decided I wasn't doing the lamp test. It can take forever. Instead, I tried to scream. In my head, it was a full-on yell, like I was going to rip the air apart. What came out was a breathy whisper, nothing more. So I tried rolling over and over, like if I could just fling myself out of bed hard enough, the spell would break. But it didn't matter what I did. Every time I'd blink and suddenly I'd be reset. Same spot, lying on my side, like my body was snapped back into position. And that's when I felt it. Not like a touch, more like pressure. Like when someone stands too close behind you and you don't even have to turn around to know they're there. I lifted my head just a little and I caught a glimpse of him. A silhouette near the edge of the room. Tall, too tall. A hat shape, wide brim, like an old-fashioned outline cut out of darkness. And then I dropped straight back into another loop before my brain could even process what I'd seen. But he didn't go away. At some point, I managed to get out of bed, sort of. I drifted through the house like I was walking underwater. Everything looked normal at first, almost insultingly normal, like my brain was trying to lull me into trusting it. And then I passed the bathroom. There was a staircase inside it. Not a small one, a huge wooden staircase, like something you'd see in a fancy old hotel, wedged right into the middle of the tile floor, like it had always belonged there. I didn't even think. I just backed away like, absolutely not. Not today. Not going up the bathroom stairs to wherever my subconscious thinks it's funny to send me. I grabbed my phone. It felt off. Just slightly laggy, like my fingers were moving a fraction of a second ahead of the screen. Still, I texted my girlfriend, Mara, something like, "Hey, are you awake? I think I'm finally up." And right as I hit send, the screen went black. Dead. Like someone unplugged reality. That's when it hit me again. Still dreaming. Then came what I can only describe as the endgame sequence, when you start trying anything because you're terrified you're never actually going to wake up. I tried tricks. I tried panic. I tried bargaining with my own brain. I even tried the kind of desperate, stupid stuff you try when you feel trapped, like thinking, if I do something embarrassing in here, maybe I'll shock myself awake. I had a whole moment of considering wetting myself just to force my body to react, and then immediately thought, nope, laundry is where I draw the line. Which is absurd because I was literally negotiating with a nightmare. I started doing this thing where every time I woke up, I'd launch myself out of bed as fast as possible, like a spring-loaded escape. All it did was trap me in a rapid loop. Eyes open, jump, reset. Eyes open, jump, reset. Over and over until I was dizzy from a motion I wasn't even truly making. And then I felt him again. This time he wasn't a glimpse. This time he was there. I'm about 1.82 meters, around 6 feet, and he made me feel small, like a kid, like prey. He stepped out of the dim part of the room, and I finally got a clear look. A long coat that hung straight down, like it was stitched from night. A hat with a wide brim that swallowed his face in shadow. And his eyes, God, his eyes. They weren't just red, they were lit, like coals, like 2 points of heat looking straight through me. I tried not to stare because something in me, some instinct older than logic, was screaming that meeting his gaze was a mistake. He started walking toward me. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. I think he noticed how scared I was. Because he paused And then, calm as anything, he put on sunglasses. Like he was trying to make it easier for me. Like it was considerate. That somehow made it worse. Then he spoke. Not in the muffled, dream voice way people talk in nightmares. This was deep and heavy, like it came from a place that wasn't made of sleep. I had heard people talk about a figure like this. Friends, online threads, whatever. But nobody ever mentioned him talking. And when he did, it wasn't random. He said, "I will show you the way, little one." I froze. Completely. Backed up until I hit the corner of my room, like I could make myself smaller by pressing into the wall. Then he started saying something else. Words that weren't words. A chant, maybe. Low and rhythmic, like a language my brain couldn't decode. And the longer it went on, the more terrified I got, because it felt less like he was haunting me, and more like he was doing something to me. Like a lesson. Like a marking. When it stopped, I jolted awake for real, like my body finally snapped back into itself. And I just lay there, breathing hard, staring at my ceiling, trying to convince myself the corners of my room were just corners again. So yeah, what is his moral standing? Hey, thanks for listening. I don't talk about this much, so I'm just going to tell it the way it feels, okay? I'm 23 now, and this has been happening for so long that the beginning is kind of fuzzy. I remember it really becoming a thing when I was around 16 or 17. For a while, I used to smoke weed pretty regularly, and weirdly enough, the nights got quieter when I did. Like, the experiences didn't hit as hard, or didn't show up at all. But I can't lean on that anymore. New job, new responsibilities, and I don't want to risk any of it. So here's what keeps coming back. This recurring dream. It's almost always my bedroom. Always the same layout, same corners, same feeling in the air, like the room is holding its breath. Sometimes it's like sleep paralysis. I wake up, but I can't move the way I want to. I can manage these tiny, strained twitches, like my body is trying to prove it still belongs to me. And in those moments, it's like something is there with me. Not crashing in, not screaming, just present. And the more I fight to move, the worse it gets. So I've learned to do this thing where I calm myself down and kind of talk myself back into waking. Other times, it's a different version of trapped. I'll get up and start doing normal stuff, turning my head, sitting up, sometimes even standing, and then I realize I can't leave the room. Like the door is technically there, but it might as well be painted on the wall. Or I'll see myself still asleep in bed while I'm also standing there, watching, trying to make sense of how that could even be possible. Those are the moments that really mess with my head afterward. And that's when it usually shows up. I'm going to call it Miles, just to give it a name, because calling it the thing makes it sound worse than it feels. Miles almost always looks like me. Not a scary monster version, just me, current me, like it somehow keeps up even when I haven't looked in the mirror in a while. Same weight, same hair length, same posture, but the face is the strangest part. The harder I try to focus on its features, like really pin down the eyes, the mouth, anything, the less defined it becomes. Like wet paint. Like a smudge that wants to be a face but won't let me lock onto it. Miles talks to me. I know that sounds wild, but in the moment, it's real enough that I'm listening like it matters. The frustrating part is, when I finally wake up, I can't hold on to the words. It's like my brain dumps the audio file the second I open my eyes. I'll remember the feeling of being spoken to, like someone pressing a warm hand to the center of my chest and telling me I'm okay, but the actual sentences turn into nonsense. like trying to recall a dream you felt in your bones, and then it slips right through your fingers. Here's the part that confuses me. When I'm stuck in the bed paralysis kind of dream, Miles never does anything threatening. Not once. If anything, it's like it's steady, like it has a job to do. Because sometimes there are other things, hallucination type stuff that I've read can happen with sleep paralysis. Shadows, shapes, the feeling of something trying to come into the room. Like the windows are suddenly vulnerable, like the door doesn't matter anymore. And those things feel wrong in a way Miles doesn't, like static crawling under my skin. And I know this sounds dramatic, but in those moments it genuinely feels like those other presences can't reach me. Like they're outside, banging around, and the room is the barrier. And Miles is part of that barrier. And then Miles crawled up onto the bed and laid on top of me. That sounds terrifying when I say it out loud, but I swear, the weight wasn't crushing. It wasn't the classic sleep paralysis chest pressure people talk about. It felt grounding, like a heavy blanket fresh out of the dryer, like being pinned to the safest part of the world. My panic didn't spike, it dropped. Like my body finally got the message that I didn't need to fight. And then I woke up, and the room was just my room again. The other layer of all this is what it does to me during the day. I go through stretches where I feel like people around me get suspicious of me for no reason. Like the tiniest misunderstanding turns into someone looking at me like I'm dangerous, or like I'm hiding something. And then I'm stuck doing this constant balancing act, trying to be calm, trying to be normal, trying to keep trust intact even though I genuinely don't feel like I've done anything to deserve losing it. I don't know how much of that is stress or anxiety or just my brain trying to connect dots that aren't connected. I just know it feels like a battle sometimes, like I'm always defending myself from something invisible. And that's why, as strange as this all is, I can't shake the feeling that Miles is on my side. Benevolent is the closest word I've got. Protective, maybe. Like whatever it says to me is important, even if I can't remember the exact words afterward. Sorry if I'm rambling. I've never told it this fully before. I think I've always been afraid that if I explained it in detail, it would sound ridiculous. Or worse, it would sound like I'm not okay. But I am okay. I'm just trying to make sense of something that keeps visiting me in the same shape, in the same room, again and again. And honestly, I keep wondering if anyone else has ever experienced something like this. This presence that looks like you, speaks softly, shows up mostly in dreams or paralysis, and somehow feels like a shield. That's the whole story. That's what I've been carrying around. Thanks for letting me say it out loud. So, quick context. I work at a tourist attraction that runs cave tours. I can't get too specific about where, but one of our most popular options is a haunted tour. The whole gimmick is that you're walking through parts of the cavern that are completely unlit, and you're only allowed these tiny, dim lanterns that barely do anything except make the shadows feel alive. When I was training, my trainer, Mara, was surprisingly blunt. She'd basically point-blank tell me which stories were rooted in real reports and which ones had been, let's say, gift-wrapped for maximum drama. And I appreciated that, because I'm not exactly the type who believes every weird sound is a ghost clearing its throat. I'm a skeptic, right? And caves are perfect for messing with your head. It's dark. You've got a group of people clustered together. Everyone's already tense, and you're feeding them scary stories. Your brain is itching to turn every echo into a footstep. Still, on the third haunted tour I ever led, something happened that I couldn't shake. We were in this chamber where the acoustics are ridiculous. Sounds bounce in ways that make them seem like they're coming from behind you, or right next to your ear, or from some impossible corner. I was standing with my back to the wall, talking, when I heard this sharp little noise, like a soft click and a scrape, right behind me. I paused mid-sentence and went, "Did anyone else hear that?" And everybody murmured yes. My first thought was, okay, phone notification. Maybe someone's screen tapped, sound bounced off the stone, weird cave trick. So I tried to laugh it off and keep moving, because the last thing you want is to look spooked when you're the person holding the lantern. But then we got to the next room, the one where we do the total darkness moment. The part where we have everyone put the lanterns out and just stand there with nothing. No glow, no outlines, no sense of distance, just breathing and stone and your imagination doing cartwheels. That room has a reputation, and I know reputations can be fed and repeated and exaggerated, but even the way my coworkers talk about it is different, quieter, less joking, like they don't want to say too much out loud. There are old stories tied to it. Supposedly, the original owner and his wife stayed in that area during early exploration, and there are accounts of bodies being temporarily kept down there back in the day. I've also heard a story, again, who knows what's true, that something violent happened in that stretch of the cave decades ago. Anyway, we gather everyone in. I do the little speech about staying close and not panicking and breathing slow, and then I have everyone blow out their lanterns. The second the last light disappeared, my whole body reacted like I'd stepped into an electric field. Every hair on my arms lifted. Not like, ooh, spooky, like full body alarm. And it wasn't even a thought. It was a sensation, like this buzzing prickle under my skin, the way your nerves feel after you've been startled, but turned the fear volume up way too high. And then, this is the part that still annoys me, because it's so simple. I felt what I can only describe as a hand, not grabbing, not squeezing, just a light, calm pressure on my shoulder for a second or two, like someone was there and wanted me to know it. I lit my lantern early, like way early, and the group felt it too. You could hear it in the way people shifted and cleared their throats and got quiet in that specific, tense way, like when everyone is pretending they're fine because nobody wants to be the first person to say, "I'm scared." I ended that darkness portion sooner than I was supposed to. I played it off like timing, like, all right, we're moving on. But inside I was thinking, okay, that got to me. That got to me for real. Fast forward a couple weeks. By then, I'd led a bunch more haunted tours. Some nights were uneventful. Other nights you'd hear odd things, little knocks, faint shuffles, a weird metallic smell that didn't belong down there. Guests would claim they heard whispers or footsteps. And almost every time, I could come up with something that made sense. Cave airflow, water drip, gear settling, echo tricks, people hearing what they expect to hear. And the biggest thing? I still hadn't seen anything. Neither had most of my groups. Until one night with a small group that included kids. It was my third tour of the day. The first two had been completely normal. I'd actually been feeling pretty smug, like, yep, psychological thrill ride. That's all it is. This last group was 6 people, a family of 4 and a young couple, probably early 20s. The family had 2 kids, one around 8 or 9, the other maybe 11. And that was new for me. I hadn't run the haunted tour with kids before, and I'd heard the usual stuff people say about children being more sensitive to paranormal things. I don't know if I buy that, but I remember clocking it anyway. There's a specific section of the cave where reports cluster. Guides talk about it. Guests talk about it. It's like one of those spots where the stories pile up until it starts feeling heavy, even if you don't believe any of them. And there's this figure people describe. Not one of the historical ghosts we mention in the tour. Not the owner or the wife. Something else. The descriptions are bizarrely consistent too. Tall, unnaturally thin, pale, like bone white. And the creepiest detail people repeat, Where the eyes should be, it's just these dark, empty hollows. I'm supposed to tell a story in that section, something from a few years ago that's in the official tour script. But here's the thing. The script doesn't describe it the way people do in the off-the-record stories. The script version is more like a shadow thing. Dark, like coal. Vague. Something you can imagine without getting too specific. So that night, as we approached that stretch, I started feeling a little off, like a headache blooming behind my eyes, and this brief nauseous wave. It could have been anything. The air down there changes. You're talking all day. You're tired. Whatever. I told the scripted version, kept it controlled, didn't add the tall, pale, hollow eyes details. If anything, I described it as dark because that's what I'm supposed to do. And when we moved on, I noticed the younger kid had gone really quiet, like silent. He was pressed into his mom's side, gripping her hand with both of his. His face had that tight look kids get when they're trying not to cry because they don't want to be embarrassed. At first I thought, all right, I did my job. Spooked him a little. Haunted tour success. I crouched a bit so I was closer to the kid's level, and I asked gently, "Hey buddy, what did you see?" I was honestly expecting a shadow, a floating light, a face, a lady in a dress. Something that I could either joke about or theatrically validate, depending on the vibe. The kid swallowed hard, and in this shaky little voice he said something like, "It was really tall, and it was white, and it was looking right at me. It had dark eyes." And the reason that stuck in my throat is I hadn't described that. Not even close. I'd said the opposite. I'd gone with the vague, dark description like always. And yet he described the exact thing that people independently claim to see in that exact spot. He was sniffling for the rest of the tour. Not a dramatic kid tantrum, more like he was trying to be brave and failing in slow motion. The mom kept rubbing his back the whole time. The older kid didn't tease him, which honestly told me a lot. Even the young couple in the group had gone quieter, like the whole energy shifted. We finished the tour and everyone thanked me and left, but it wasn't the usual, "haha, that was fun, spooky" vibe. It felt more like people leaving a tense movie theater after a scene that hit too real. And after they were gone, I just stood there for a second, lantern in my hand, thinking, okay, that's not my coworker telling a story to mess with me. That's not an adult leaning into the experience. That's a kid describing something I didn't feed him. Now, there's also local folklore tied to the cave and the surrounding area. Stories about the land being watched over, or the cave being inhabited by some kind of powerful spirit. I don't know what's accurate and what's been passed around and embellished. I've heard claims that people avoided the cave for a long time, and there's even an old rumor that someone once took a preserved burial figure, like a mummy, and displayed it down there, and that it later disappeared. I do know the broader region has had documented discoveries of ancient burials, and that some remains have been recovered and returned over time. That part isn't just spooky storytelling, it's real history in the area. And knowing that makes the rumors feel less like pure fantasy, even if the ghost part is still up in the air. So where I'm at now is this weird middle place. I'm still skeptical. I still think the human brain is ridiculously good at scaring itself in the dark. But I can't pretend that kid's description didn't bother me. And I can't pretend that moment in the pitch black room, when the lanterns were out and I felt that light touch on my shoulder, didn't change something in me. It's almost embarrassing to admit, but there's a part of me that wants something undeniable to happen. Not because I want to be terrified, I don't, but because it's hard living in the in-between. Hard hearing story after story from coworkers, people who don't even care about paranormal stuff, saying, no, seriously, something happened. And always having just enough doubt to explain it away, but never enough certainty to fully relax. And the worst part? Every time I lift the lantern and lead another group into that darkness, my body remembers before my mind does. So, I've been sitting on this for a while, because it sounds strange even as I say it out loud, but I need to tell someone, start to finish, the way it actually felt. A few months ago, things started getting weird. Not scary at first, just oddly specific, like the world was winking at me. It began with these intense little coincidences that kept stacking up. I'd think of something random, like a phrase, an idea, a name I hadn't heard in years, and then it would show up later the same day. Once, I looked up this obscure concept online, something I had no reason to be searching, and then I heard it pop up in a stranger's conversation at a cafe. Another time I searched a word just because it felt important, and then I saw it on a huge sign while I was driving, like it had been planted there for me. I told myself it was just my brain doing that thing where it notices patterns, but the timing kept being too sharp, too on the nose. It started to feel like my thoughts were somehow echoing out into the world, and the world was echoing back. And that's when it shifted. Because after the synchronicities came something physical. It started as this burning sensation on my skin, mostly my forearms, sometimes my shoulders and upper back. At first, I thought maybe it was detergent or some kind of rash coming on, but it didn't feel like irritation. It felt like heat with pressure behind it, like something was actually pressing a hot surface against me, except there was nothing there. The pain wasn't subtle either. It would flare up fast, and I'd jerk or gasp, like my body was reacting before my brain could even form a thought. I'd run my hands over the spot and feel nothing. No warmth, no source, no explanation. Then later I noticed marks. Not always. Sometimes there'd be nothing. But a few times there were faint blotches that looked disturbingly like contact burns. The kind you'd get if you touched a hot pan by accident. Except I hadn't. I live alone. I wasn't near anything hot. It made my stomach drop in this way I can't really describe. Around the same time, my vision started doing things that terrified me. The first big moment was in the bathroom mirror. I was brushing my teeth, totally normal, and I glanced up, and for a split second I swear I saw my own skull. Like my face flickered off and I saw the bone underneath. Just a flash, like a frame of film that didn't belong. I froze so hard my jaw hurt. I leaned closer, turned the light on and off, blinked, splashed water on my face. Nothing happened again right away. But after that, the distortions kept coming. Sometimes it was like the walls breathed, just slightly, like the surface moved when it shouldn't. Other times I'd catch shapes sliding across the corner of my vision, shadows where there weren't any objects. And then, the faces. That's the part I hate saying out loud, because it wasn't like seeing a face in a cloud or imagining something in wallpaper. It was more like an imprint, like something had been pressed into the wall. I'd look over and there would be a face-like shape, and it would stay. Not for a second, sometimes for minutes. Once, it felt like it lingered for most of the evening. I'd look away and look back, hoping it would reset like an optical illusion, and it wouldn't. I started avoiding certain rooms. I started keeping lights on. I started feeling like my own home wasn't fully mine anymore. And then the messages started. That's what it felt like, messages. I tried to be rational. I told myself, Nolan, you're stressed. You're connecting dots that don't belong together. I tried to laugh it off. I tried to stop feeding it attention. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more intense my body got, like my nervous system was stuck in this constant something is wrong mode. There was one night that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. I took a bath because I couldn't calm down. I wanted the warmth, the quiet, anything that would make my muscles unclench. And I must have been exhausted because I fell asleep in the tub. When I woke up, I was disoriented, water cooled, skin pruned, the room dim, and then this wave hit me. Not like a normal dream fading. This was different. It was like waking up into a vision that kept going. I saw these fast, layered images, almost like symbols or scenes flipping by, and I felt this heavy presence in the room. Not a person exactly, just a pressure, like something was close and aware and trying to get my attention. It didn't feel comforting. It felt powerful and unfamiliar, like standing too close to a loudspeaker. You can't see what's making the noise, but your body feels it. And when it finally passed, I was left sitting there, shaking, staring at the tiles like they were going to rearrange themselves. Since then, the anxiety hasn't really let up. I'm walking around with this dread under everything. I'm second-guessing my senses. I'm checking my skin for marks. I'm staring at walls, trying not to stare at walls. I'm watching my own thoughts like they're dangerous, like if I think the wrong thing, the world will throw it back at me again. And the worst part is how alone it feels, because I don't know what category any of this belongs in. Is it something spiritual? Am I being haunted? Is it stress doing something to my brain and body? Is it medical, psychological, environmental? Is there something in my home that's triggering hallucinations or making my skin react? I don't know. I just know it started with these bright, almost magical coincidences, and somehow it turned into pain, distortion, and fear. And I'm telling you this because I need an explanation that isn't just, "You're fine," and isn't just, "You're doomed," either. I need something grounded, something real. Because whatever this is, it feels like it's getting closer. And I don't want to be alone with it anymore. So, I've always been curious about the supernatural. Not in a, "I'm definitely a believer" way. More like, I've always had one foot in skepticism and one foot in fascination. I've had a couple strange moments over the years, little things that made me pause, but nothing that ever truly flipped the switch for me. Until this. It was 4th of July weekend, and my wife, Mara, and I had plans with a big group of friends at a lake house near Eufaula, Oklahoma. If you've ever been out there in the summer, you know the vibe. Busy roads, coolers everywhere, sunburns, boats, people laughing. Totally normal. And for me, it wasn't even new. I'd been to that lake a bunch growing up, so there wasn't a single creepy thought in my head when we pulled up. The house itself was older, but it had clearly been expanded over the years. Newer porches, added rooms, a garage that looked more modern than the rest. Upstairs was where most of us were sleeping. It had this open living room area at the top of the stairs, and then 2 bedrooms, one on each side. Mara and I had one bedroom, another couple had the other, and a couple more people were on air mattresses out in the upstairs living area. That first night, around early evening, a handful of us decided to go to a little bar not far away. Mara wasn't feeling it. Neither were a few other friends, so they stayed back at the house to relax. We were out for a few hours, and I was the designated driver. No drinking. That part matters because I wasn't even slightly buzzed. I was clear-headed. We got back around 10-ish, and the house had that late-night quiet to it, like everyone had already been winding down for a while. I went upstairs and headed into our room. It was pitch black in there. The only light was this tiny blue dot from a charger plugged into the wall, just enough to barely outline the bed and show me where Mara was lying. I slipped into bed, facing her, and did that normal end-of-night thing. I whispered that I loved her, kissed her goodnight, and she said it back. We went quiet, and for maybe 30 seconds it was completely normal. I closed my eyes for what felt like a second. When I opened them again, I saw what I thought was Mara sitting up, like her silhouette had risen up off the mattress. But it was too dark. My eyes were still adjusting, so I just stared, trying to make sense of the shape. I watched it for a good 20 seconds, maybe longer, waiting for my vision to sharpen. Finally, I quietly went, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she answered immediately, "What?" Her voice came from right in front of me, from the spot where she'd been lying the whole time. My entire body went cold. I didn't move. I couldn't, because the shape I'd been watching, this Mara sitting up, was not her. As my eyes adjusted more, the silhouette got clearer, and I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It had definition, a head, a face, and it was moving, slowly, like it was leaning closer, inch by inch, like it knew I was staring and it didn't care. I can't even explain how long I watched it. It felt like time stretched out. My skin was crawling, goosebumps everywhere. I couldn't look away. Then Mara said in this small, careful voice, "What, babe? Did you see something?" And even that, her asking that, made my stomach drop, because why would she ask that unless... I tried to play it off. I really did. I kept whispering things like, "It's fine. It's nothing. Just go to sleep. I'm probably just tired." But I wasn't tired. I wasn't imagining it. I was terrified. At some point, so fast I can't even pinpoint when, the figure just wasn't there anymore. Like it dissolved back into the dark. She got up so quickly she practically stumbled, and I followed her straight out into the upstairs living room where a couple of our friends were half asleep on air mattresses. And that's when Mara, shaking, goes, "Guys, Rowan just saw something in our room, and I need to tell you what I saw earlier while you were all gone." I remember my heart pounding because I hadn't told her anything, not a word. I hadn't described what I saw. I hadn't even said someone or something. I'd kept it trapped in my throat. Mara explained that while we were at the bar, she'd been alone in that room for a couple hours in total darkness. At one point, she noticed movement outside the door. She could see it from the thin line of light leaking in under the door, like someone was standing out there. She said she didn't think much of it at first. She assumed it was someone walking by, maybe someone checking on her. So she closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep. But then she opened her eyes again, and she saw something coming toward the bed. Not walking, crawling, on all fours, from the doorway, across the floor. Slow, controlled, like it had all the time in the world. She said she couldn't move, like her body locked up, like sleep paralysis, except she was awake enough to know what she was seeing. And then she described it. A tall, unnatural-looking thing, thin, like a stick figure silhouette, darker than the dark around it. And the head was big and round. Then she said the face, and I swear to you, my vision tunneled. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out, because she described the exact face I had seen. Round face, bright orange, bead-like eyes, and this massive grin, too wide, stretched from ear to ear, with sharp, jagged teeth that didn't look human at all. The moment she said that, I just sat there frozen. I couldn't even speak. I didn't need to confirm it out loud. Mara looked at me and immediately knew. She could see it on my face. While everyone was talking at once, asking questions, trying to calm her down, trying to make sense of it, we all heard a sound. From our bedroom. Clear as day, like a coin hitting the floor. Not a creak, not the house settling, not a random tap. A metallic clink and a little bounce. Everyone went silent. Even my brother, who was downstairs, yelled up asking what we were doing because he'd heard it too. A couple of the guys grabbed their phone flashlights and went into the room to check. They turned the lights on, searched the floor, checked near the bed, checked under furniture. Nothing. No coins, no little objects. Nothing that could have made that sound. The room was spotless. After that, nobody wanted Mara and me sleeping in there. So our friends dragged the mattress out into the upstairs living area, and we all crammed together like we were kids at a sleepover, except nobody was laughing. We were sitting there wide awake for hours, replaying every detail, trying to debunk it, trying to come up with any explanation that didn't make us sound crazy. Eventually, we all fell asleep, but it wasn't a peaceful kind of sleep. It was the kind where your body shuts down because it has no choice. The next morning, we told the people who'd slept downstairs everything. And that's when the friend who owned the house hesitated for a second, like he was deciding whether to say it. And then he goes, have I ever showed y'all what's in the backyard? He told us they were Native American graves, unmarked. And that little walled-off grave area sat almost directly beneath the window of our upstairs bedroom. I remember just standing there, staring at those stones, feeling my skin prickle again. Because suddenly, the house didn't feel like a normal lake house anymore. It felt like a place that had been built on top of something it didn't understand. And that's the end of it, really. We haven't been back. We don't plan to go back. I still don't know what that thing was. I can't prove it. All I have is the fact that Mara described it perfectly, without me ever telling her what I saw. Same eyes, same grin, same shape, same slow, deliberate way it moved toward the bed. And the worst part? I've seen that face a few times in dreams since then. Not every night, not even often, but enough that I know my brain hasn't filed it away and forgotten it. It's like it left a scratch in my memory. And honestly, I'm still stunned. I'm still trying to understand what happened in that room, in that dark, on a weekend that was supposed to be nothing more than fireworks and friends and a lake. So, let me tell you something that still gives me chills, even saying it out loud. A few months back, we were staying at this lake house with some friends. One of those places that's cozy in the daytime, but at night, it gets really quiet. Everybody decided to head out and grab some drinks, and my wife, Mara, stayed back at the house by herself. I didn't go too hard or anything. I had maybe a beer, 2 tops. Just enough to feel relaxed, not enough to be stumbling around. When I got back, I slipped into the bedroom and it was pitch black, like the kind of dark where you can't even tell what you're looking at, you just catch shapes. I could make out this silhouette on the bed, and I assumed it was her, lying there. So I crawl in, lay down facing her, and I'm squinting, trying to see her face, but I can't. It's just shadow. Then I notice something off. It looked like she was sitting up. Not fully, but like her upper body was raised. And I remember whispering, real soft, something like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you sitting up?" And then I hear her voice, but not from where the silhouette was. Her voice came from right in front of me, lower, like she was still lying down where she should be. And that little mismatch, just that tiny, impossible detail, hit me like ice water. My stomach dropped, because if she was right in front of me, then what was that shape? I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stared into the darkness, and the longer I stared, the more my eyes adjusted, and I realized it wasn't sitting up at all. It was on the edge of the bed, standing there, hovering over us. This tall black figure, like not a person in the dark, not a coat on a chair. I mean tall. 8, maybe 9 feet, the way it filled the space. And here's the part I can't forget. It didn't step closer like a normal thing would. It leaned, but only its face. Like its face was stretching out from the darkness, slowly reaching toward me, closing the distance inch by inch. And I'm just stuck there, frozen, watching it come right up until it's inches from my face. And that's when I see its eyes. Tiny, bead-like orange eyes, with these pinprick black pupils. I swear to you, my whole body locked. Like my brain couldn't decide whether to scream or run, so it chose neither. I just stared at it, breathing shallow, heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. Mara turns toward me and goes, "What? Did you see something?" And I don't know why, I still don't, but I couldn't say it. I just whispered, "I don't want to talk about it." She sits up a little, instantly alert. "No, you have to tell me if you saw something." So I admitted it. I said, "Yeah, I saw something." But I didn't tell her what. And we tried to just calm down. Like, okay, don't spiral, don't freak out, it's fine, go to sleep. But she couldn't. I could feel it in her. She was terrified. So we both got up and practically speed walked out into the main area where our friends were hanging out. And she's shaken, like she's been holding something in all night. She looks at everyone and goes, "Okay, I think Jax just saw something, and I need to tell you what I was seeing while you were all gone." Some of them kind of chuckle, like she's about to tell a spooky story for fun. But she wasn't playing, not even close. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said at one point she saw something lower, like a shadow moving along the floor toward the bed, like it was crawling on all fours, coming closer. And when she described its face, I swear I felt my whole body go numb. She said it had tiny orange eyes, and this massive grin, with jagged teeth. And I just sat there, silent, because I hadn't told her any of that. Not the eyes, not the height, not the feeling of it leaning in toward me. That was exactly what I saw. And I wasn't laughing like everyone else was trying to do. I couldn't even fake it. I just stared into space trying to make sense of it, because whatever that was, it didn't fit into anything I thought I knew about the world. And then, this is the part that happened so fast it didn't even feel real. We all heard something in that bedroom. A hard drop, like something fell onto the wood floor, clear as day. So all of us walked over there together. We open the door, look around, scan the floor, and there's nothing. Nothing at all. No cup, no phone, no coin, no clutter. The floor was spotless. Just that sound. And then emptiness. Later, after all of this, we found out something about the property that made my skin crawl all over again. Someone told us there was an old burial site out back, fenced off, with stones still there. And the worst part? It was right outside the window of the room we'd been sleeping in. I don't know what I believe about folklore or spirits or anything like that. I don't know if there's some explanation that makes sense. All I know is this. Whatever we saw, whatever was in that room, felt aware of us. Like it wanted us to know it was there. And even now, telling you this, I'm getting that same tight feeling in my chest. The same cold shiver up the back of my neck. I haven't really talked about it much since it happened, but it still sticks with me. So, yeah. What do you think that was? Okay, I'm gonna start from the very beginning, because I swear, this has followed me for as long as I can remember. When I was little, like 6 or 7, I was always aware of things. Not in a normal kid imagination way either. I mean, I'd walk into a room and immediately feel like I wasn't alone. I don't even know if I had imaginary friends, but I was weirdly obsessed with ghosts. I used to tell anyone who would listen that our basement was haunted, and honestly, I still think it was. That basement had this heavy feeling, like the air was thicker down there. I'd be halfway down the stairs and get that sinking, prickly sensation, like someone was watching me from every dark corner. And the creepiest part is, I started seeing this figure. It was tall, too tall, just a black shape, like it swallowed the light around it. And it always had this hat, like an old-fashioned brimmed hat. I used to call it the tall shadow man. It never lunged at me or anything, never spoke. It would just stand in my doorway like it owned the place, like it was checking in on me. And even before I started seeing it, I'd wake up from these horrible nightmares, violent ones. I'm talking dreams where my family was hurt, or something awful happened and I couldn't stop it. It felt so real that I'd wake up shaking, heart pounding, and I'd be scared to fall asleep again because I knew it would come back. Then middle school started, and I was living with my mom. The feeling of being watched never really went away, but it got quieter for a while. I wasn't seeing as much. I almost thought maybe I'd grown out of it. But one night I woke up, and I know what I saw. There were two dark figures at the side of my bed, like silhouettes, crouched kind of low. The second my brain caught up and I realized, oh my God, those are people. They ducked down like they were hiding. And when I sat up and looked again, nothing. Gone. For a second, I convinced myself it had to be my younger siblings messing with me. So I got up and went to check. Because what else do you do when you're trying to force logic into something that doesn't make sense? And they were both asleep. Deep asleep. Across the house. No way they got there that fast. And no way they were faking. Not long after that, we moved again. Into this house that had a morgue basically right nearby. Like, not down the street nearby. I mean right there. And I remember thinking, of course this is where we end up. That's when things got worse. The watching feeling came back stronger, like I could feel eyes on my skin. At first it was just uneasy. Then stuff started happening, and not the kind of stuff you can blame on a draft or a loose shelf. Small things first. A pencil would shoot off my desk and smack the wall. A hairbrush would slide and then suddenly launch like somebody flicked it. Little bottles, lotions, makeup, ending up across the room like they'd been thrown. And I tried to rationalize it. I really did. I'd stand there staring at the spot they came from, like if I stared hard enough I could catch physics doing something normal. But it didn't stay small. One night, this part still makes my stomach twist. My chinchilla's cage moved. Not tipped, not rattled. It flew across the room and hit the floor sideways. The sound was so loud I swear I felt it in my bones. I ran over, panicking, and in that moment, it wasn't just fear. It was like the air turned angry. Like something in the room was mean, and it wanted me to feel that. After that, it got more personal. The second I stepped inside, my whole body went cold. That deep, instinctive warning you can't explain. Like walking into a room mid-argument, and you can feel the tension even if nobody says a word. And then, right by my ear, I heard a little girl's voice. Clear as day. Soft, close, like lips near skin. She said, "My name is..." And then a name I can't fully remember now. Something simple like Mara or Mila. I just know it wasn't comforting. It wasn't sweet. It was wrong. It felt like something pretending. I stood there frozen, and my eyes watered, and my skin prickled all over because I knew it wasn't a child. It was like it wanted me to think it was. And that wasn't the only way it played with me. Sometimes it would mimic people. I'd see my sister pass by my door, and then realize she wasn't even home. Or I'd hear the cadence of someone moving around in a way that sounded familiar, safe, until I remembered the house was empty. There was one moment that still messes with my head the most. I was dating this guy at the time, and I walked through the kitchen and saw him sitting at the table. I remember the angle of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward. So normal, I barely registered it. I kept walking, went into my room, and there he was on my bed. Like he'd teleported. But he hadn't. Because the thing at the table wasn't him. It was something wearing him like a costume for a second, just to see if it could. Eventually I moved out. I stayed with my boyfriend, Cameron, while my place was getting ready. And I hoped so badly that whatever this was would stop if I changed locations. Like maybe it was tied to the houses or the land or something I could outrun. But then one night at Cameron's, I woke up and saw an older man walking around the room. Not a shadow, an actual older man shape. He moved like he belonged there, like he knew the layout. He walked near the doorway and out of sight. When Cameron came back into the room, I asked him, half asleep, half panicked, why his dad was walking around. He looked at me like I'd said something impossible, and he goes, "My dad isn't here." I told him what I saw, every detail, and he got quiet. Like really quiet. He'd never been the type to believe in anything paranormal. But his face changed. Later, he told me the previous owner had died not long before they moved in, and that the man had built the house himself. So now, here I am, in my own house, with Cameron. And I still can't fully relax when I'm alone, because sometimes it hits me out of nowhere. This feeling like someone is standing just out of sight, watching, waiting for me to notice. Things vanish and then show up in places I swear I already checked. Doors open by themselves at random times. I keep having brutal nightmares and these vivid, almost lucid dreams that leave me exhausted like I never slept at all. And my mental health has been rough. I've had these waves of anxiety and depression that feel like they come out of nowhere. And I hate even admitting this, but sometimes I get these really dark thoughts, intrusive, scary ones, that don't feel like me. Like they don't match the person I know I am. My body has been struggling too. I've had back pain that started randomly and just kept getting worse, and my health has felt like it's been slowly deteriorating the last few years. And here's the thing I need you to understand, because this is where I get stuck. From about 16 to 19, I was trapped in a seriously abusive relationship. I'm out now. I'm safe now. But I'm still carrying a lot from it. CPTSD kind of stuff, anxiety, hypervigilance, all of it. But then, there are the things I've seen. The cage moving, the voice, the mimicry, the way it all started when I was a kid, long before anything else happened. So I don't know what I'm dealing with. And honestly, I'm scared that if I can't figure out whether this is paranormal or psychological, or some horrible mix of both, I'm never going to feel truly safe in my own life. I really need help. So I'm in my early 30s now, married, working as a graphic designer, and I've always been the kind of person who falls in love with anything visual. Paintings, films, photography. If it tells a story without even speaking, I'm in. And I've never really shared stuff like this online before. It's always been something I'd mention to my wife, or maybe a couple close friends late at night when the conversation drifts into that quiet, Okay, but tell me something real, territory. But this one memory has followed me for so long that I don't know. I felt like telling someone outside my little circle. My first brush with anything paranormal wasn't even something I saw with my own eyes. I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7, and we were driving out of the city in Bosnia to visit my grandparents in their village. It wasn't a huge trip, maybe an hour or so, and the closer we got, the more the roads narrowed. You know the kind, main highway, then you peel off onto a smaller road that snakes through scattered houses and fields. I remember staring out the window, half bored, half daydreaming, while my parents and a relative in the front seat pointed out places as we passed them. Oh, that's Amir's place. He added that second floor last year. And over there, that house belongs to the Hadjic family. Just casual village commentary. But then we rolled past one particular house and the whole vibe shifted. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just subtle. Their voices got lower, the way adults do when they think a kid is listening but don't want to make it obvious they're being careful. My mom asked, almost casually, "Does anyone live there now?" And my relative answered, "No, not anymore. After things started happening, they moved out." Another family tried living there after, but they didn't last either. They left fast. That got my full attention immediately, obviously. I leaned forward like, "Excuse me?" I started firing questions like a little interrogator. What things? Like what happened? Why would they leave? My dad kept his eyes on the road and tried to make it sound normal, like he was describing bad plumbing instead of whatever this was. He goes, "They said they heard voices inside. Stuff would move. Doors, objects, just strange things." And I remember how weird it felt, because he didn't sound like he was telling a spooky story. He sounded like he was reporting weather. When we got to my grandparents' place, I couldn't let it go. Their house wasn't far from that road, and I asked them too, right away. And they didn't hesitate at all. Same story, matter of fact. Like everyone in the area had already agreed on the details a long time ago. Now, I know how this sounds. On paper, it's not much. I didn't see a ghost. No shadow ran across the hallway. No one levitated. It was just talk. But here's the thing. The people telling me this weren't the type to play along with nonsense. My parents were practical to the bone. My grandparents were even more blunt. Those old-school village personalities who don't dramatize anything unless it's truly worth it. And this was the only time in my entire life I ever heard any of them discuss anything even remotely supernatural. They weren't trying to scare me. If anything, they seemed mildly annoyed that I was asking so many questions. So that planted something in my head. For years, it stayed buried. I grew up, life happened, school, work, marriage, and that memory became one of those dusty little mental boxes you don't open often. This time they kind of laughed, because I was an adult asking about a haunted house, and I think it sounded ridiculous coming out of a grown man's mouth. But even while they laughed, I could tell they still believed what they'd said. Like the humor was just them reacting to me, not the story. And when I pressed a little, they added something that made it worse. They told me they actually knew the first family, the ones who left. Good, respected people. Not drifters, not unstable. Not the kind who would abandon property for fun. And they didn't leave to move abroad or chase a job. They relocated to another nearby village for one reason: to get out of that house. That was it. No upgrade. No, we found better. Just, we're leaving, even if it costs us. That's the detail that always sticks in my throat. A few years back, I was heading with some friends toward a small lake for a barbecue, one of those easy weekend escapes. And on impulse I said, "Let's take the other road. I want to show you something." So we detoured. And there it was. Not just vacant, not someone's away working in Germany. It was still empty, still untouched in that way a house looks when people don't even pretend they might return. The yard looked tired. The windows had that dull, blank stare, like the place wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. By then it had been, close to 15, maybe 16 years since that childhood drive. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a hardcore believer in paranormal stuff. I'm not out here looking for demons in every creaky floorboard. But standing there, seeing that house still abandoned after all that time, it did something to me. Because in Bosnia, especially in villages, people don't just leave a solid house behind. You know this if you know Balkan families at all. If someone builds a house, it becomes a life project, a legacy, something people will fight over before they'll let it sit empty. You'd need heavy machinery to drag some folks out of their own walls. And yet, 2 different families left. One of them had built it, from what I was told. And after the second family bailed, nobody moved in again. Not even the tough, fearless types, the truck drivers, the forestry workers, the farmers, the people who laugh at bad weather and don't flinch at the dark. Even they wouldn't take it. And that's the part that creeps me out most. Not the whispers, not the moving objects, just the silence around it. A perfectly good house, sitting there for years, in a place where that basically doesn't happen. And no matter how rational I try to be, I can't help thinking, what would make people like that walk away and never come back? So, back in 1998, I spent a summer on Cape Cod, in this little cluster of cottages tucked behind a big old Victorian house where the owner lived. The place my friends and I rented was tiny. 2 bedrooms, maybe 500 or 600 square feet, all knotty pine and that kind of rustic charm that's cute in the daytime and a little eerie at night. There were 4 of us staying there, but honestly, we were barely ever home. We were working non-stop, double shifts, long hours, just grinding through summer jobs. So the cottage was basically a place to shower, sleep, and collapse. And nothing weird ever happened. Not once. Well, not until the very end. When summer was wrapping up, everyone else had already peeled out, and it was just me, Callie, alone in the cottage, packing up to head back to campus. I was planning to drive back late that night, so I plugged in my old alarm clock to keep an eye on the time while I packed. It was one of those super common radio alarm clocks from the late 90s, an Emerson with that fake wood grain finish. If you saw it, you'd immediately go, oh yeah, that clock. Simple buttons, red numbers, nothing fancy. Definitely not the kind of thing with hidden features. I'm taping boxes shut, folding clothes, doing that end of summer routine, and I glance over at the clock. And instead of showing the time, it's just counting down. Not like a normal timer display. No hour, no minutes. Just a big, blunt countdown starting at 60, 59, 58. Like it's ticking off 1 minute of my life for absolutely no reason. I just froze. Because I knew that clock didn't do that. It never had. There was no countdown mode. It was an alarm clock. That was its whole personality. So I walk over, trying to stay calm, like, okay, maybe I hit something by accident. And I pick it up. I start pressing buttons, flipping switches, doing that desperate little ritual you do when electronics act possessed. After a few seconds, I manage to get the countdown to stop, and the regular time pops back on. I set it down and just stand there for a second like, what was that? Then I go back to packing, telling myself it's probably just a glitch. Maybe the outlet's weird. Maybe the cord is loose. Maybe it's just old. And then, maybe 5 minutes later, I look over again, and it's doing it again. 60, 59, 58. Same thing. No explanation. No accidental button press. Just the clock deciding it's a timer now. And that was the moment my nervous system officially clocked out. Because suddenly I was extremely aware that I was alone in this little wooden cottage with the walls creaking, the light outside getting dimmer, and this stupid alarm clock counting down like it was trying to build suspense. I didn't even try to troubleshoot it the second time. I just went into pure nope mode. I yanked the plug out of the wall, grabbed my bags, threw everything into my car, and got out of there. Immediately. I didn't wait until nighttime. I didn't finish organizing. I just left. And yes, I took the clock with me. I wasn't about to leave it behind like it belonged to the cottage now. I've told people this story over the years, and you already know what everyone says. They get that little excited look and go, "Oh, it was ghosts." And I never really believed that. I figured it had to be electrical, some odd surge, bad wiring, something like that. But here's the part that still gives me chills. Later on, I heard the cottage burned down a few years after we stayed there. Supposedly an electrical fire. I could never confirm it for sure. Might have been a rumor that got passed around and hardened into fact. But even hearing it secondhand made my stomach drop a little. Because the clock never did that again. Not once, so I don't know. I can't prove anything. I can't even explain it. All I know is, that cottage gave me 60 seconds I still can't account for. And somehow, that's worse than any ghost story someone could tell me. Okay, so I've got to tell you this story because it still makes my skin crawl a little when I think about it. For the past couple of months, I've been stuck in this confusing hot and cold thing with this guy. Let's call him Adrian. One week he'd act like he was totally into me, and the next week he'd be distant like I imagined the whole thing. I kept trying to read the signs, and honestly, it made me feel kind of ridiculous. But then, in the last couple of weeks, Adrian suddenly switched up. Like, consistent, attentive, texting first, actually following through. And at one point, I finally said something like, "You know you've been kind of on and off, right?" And he got so apologetic. He was like, "Oh my God, I didn't realize I was doing that." And he kept saying he felt awful that he'd made me feel uncertain. The next few days, he seemed determined to show me he could be better. I started to relax. I started to think, okay, maybe this is real. Then we made plans to meet up at this loungy bar, him and his friends, me and a couple of my friends. Just a casual night, nothing intense. But still, it mattered to me because it was the first time our groups were crossing paths. And the second we got there, it was like I didn't exist. No, seriously, Adrian barely acknowledged me. He didn't introduce me properly. He didn't even do the little check-in thing like, "Are you good?" He just locked into his friends like he was in a bubble. And every time I tried to join the conversation, it was like hitting an invisible wall. They'd talk over me, switch topics, or respond in a way that made it impossible to keep going. My friends were just kind of standing there too, looking at me like, is this normal? I tried to brush it off at first, like maybe he was nervous, maybe he was distracted, but it kept going. And then I tried to leave, like actually leave. I said something like, "Hey, I think I'm gonna head out." And Adrian immediately went, "No, stay," like he didn't want me to go. So I stayed, and he continued to ignore me. That part is what really got to me, because it felt like he wanted me there as some kind of prop. Like he wanted the option of me, the presence of me, but not the actual person. Eventually, I left anyway, because I could feel myself getting angrier and more embarrassed by the minute. I was upset for me, but I was also upset for my friends. I'd brought them into this situation, and it was like they got brushed aside too. I went home feeling disrespected, kind of humiliated, and just disappointed. Because up until that night, it felt like things were finally getting better. And I remember sitting on my bed thinking, that's it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Then my mom calls, and she's like, this is going to sound strange, but I'm on the phone with my psychic right now. My mom is really into that stuff. I'm not. I usually just let her have her thing and nod politely. But this time, she sounded serious. She said her psychic had been doing a reading about my mom's job stuff, totally unrelated to me. And apparently, out of nowhere, the psychic interrupts herself and goes, I need to tell you something about your daughter. So my mom tells me the psychic said there's a man around my age who's feeling jealous and kind of nasty toward me. Like he's smiling in my face, pretending to be friendly, but underneath, he's resentful. My mom goes, she said he's sending bad energy and he may be trying to mess with you. And I'm already sitting there in that gross, heavy post-bar feeling, and I'm like, wait, what? So the psychic asks my mom to send over photos and names of guys my age who are in my life. Friends, classmates, whoever. So she can see who it is more clearly. And I'm thinking, this is absurd. This is literally absurd. But I'm also unsettled enough that I'm like, fine, whatever. So I send my mom a handful of pictures. Guys I know from class, friends from school, people in my circle. And yes, I included Adrian. A little while later, my mom texts me back the psychic's response. And out of all the photos, the psychic picks Adrian. She says he's the one. She says he's pretending to be kind, but it's an act. That he likes having access to me, likes the attention, likes being seen as the good guy, but that underneath he's jealous and has bad intentions. She says he's wearing a mask and that eventually it'll slip. And then she gets weirdly specific. She warns that if he's going to mess with me, it'll show up around school and work-related stuff, like trying to undermine me, create stress, or throw me off, because we're in the same academic environment. And I'm just sitting there staring at my phone like, what the hell? Because listen, I don't consider myself someone who believes in psychics. I'm not out here making decisions based on vibes and moon phases. But the timing was creepy. The fact that my mom didn't prompt it, apparently. The fact that she picked him from a lineup. And the fact that what she described honestly matched the way he'd been acting. The hot and cold behavior, the sudden switch, the weird power move of ignoring me but still insisting I stay. It freaked me out in a way I can't fully explain. And I know, there are a million rational explanations. Confirmation bias, general statements, coincidence, my brain grabbing onto patterns because I'm already upset. But still, if you were me, sitting there after a night that made you feel small, and then you get a call saying someone who doesn't even know the details just flagged the exact guy who made you feel that way? Yeah, it got under my skin. Hey, so I want to talk about something that's been sitting heavy on my chest. And before anything else, I'm not asking anyone to come rescue me or step in physically. I'm just looking for advice because I don't really know what to make of what's happening in my house. For the last few months, my mom has been talking about this spirit she calls Conrad. She says he's her husband from a past life, and now he's basically her spirit guide. And the wild part is, she says she never even knew he existed until she bought one of those spiritual pendulums. If you've never seen one, it's like a little weighted charm on a chain. She'll ask it yes or no questions, and the way it swings is supposed to be the answer, like circles for yes, back and forth for no, that kind of thing. At first, it honestly seemed kind of harmless. She'd ask silly stuff like, "Is my hair blonde?" And it would say no. Her hair is dark brown, so, okay, whatever. But then it shifted. Fast. This all started not long after my grandma passed away, so late summer, maybe early fall. And I keep thinking, if my mom is grieving and vulnerable, maybe that's when something like this could get its claws in, you know? Whether it's something spiritual or something psychological, it feels like something is taking advantage of her being fragile. Because now she doesn't just use the pendulum for fun. She uses it to make decisions for her. Like, real decisions. And she's been taking psychedelics, mushrooms, and even DMT, because she says it strengthens the connection. She claims that when she does that, she can hear Conrad talking to her in her head. And even when she's completely sober, she'll still talk to him out loud during the day, like she's consulting him. And then she'll pause and say she got an answer inside. She also says she dreams about him and sees him, like an actual presence. She talks about seeing lights or orbs sometimes too. And I'm trying to keep an open mind, I really am, but hearing it out loud in my own head makes me realize how extreme it sounds. And it doesn't stop there. She started acting like she's spiritually elevated, I guess. Like she thinks she can put her hands on you, ask Conrad to heal you, and it'll work. Like he's going to heal someone through her. Even saying that makes me cringe because I know how unbelievable it sounds. But that's what she's doing. And she's obsessed. Like, every conversation, no matter what it starts as, loops right back to Conrad. It's like she can't help it. She'll literally say, "I know you don't like hearing about Conrad, but..." And then she launches right into it again. It's every day. It's her whole world now. I finally brought it up to a friend of mine who's older than me. She's in her early 30s. Because I needed someone with a little more life experience to tell me if I'm overreacting. At first she laughed, like she thought it was just some harmless hippie thing. But the more I explained, the more her face changed. Like, she got genuinely disturbed. And then she told me something similar happened with her dad. And she said something that kind of lodged in my stomach. That my mom could be under the influence of something really dark. Like a demon. And I know how that sounds. I know. But once that idea got planted, I couldn't unthink it. And it scares me even more because my mom has fought so hard to build a stable life. So watching her get pulled into something that seems to be taking over her mind, it feels like watching someone undo all the work it took to survive. And I feel kind of trapped, honestly. I'm 18, and I'm just barely stepping into adulthood, but I don't feel equipped for it at all. I've never had a job. I don't drive. She never really taught me or helped me learn. I'm sitting here with almost no life skills, and I hate admitting that, but it's true. Like, I didn't even know how to preheat the oven the other day. That's where I'm at. The only bright spot in this is that I started dating my boyfriend right around when all of this began, and he's been amazing. He tries to keep me out of the house as much as he can, just so I can breathe. But he has his own life and responsibilities too, so it's not like he can just carry me away from this whenever I need it. So I'm stuck in this place where I'm scared, and I don't know what's real, and I don't know what's spiritual, and I don't know what's mental health, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I guess what I'm really asking is, do I have something to worry about? Is it possible she's being influenced by something harmful, whatever that means? Or am I spiraling and scaring myself? Because from where I'm standing, her behavior feels not just quirky or eccentric. It feels consuming. It feels unsafe in a way I can't fully explain. I just want some clarity. I just want a better idea of what could be going on. and what someone like me is supposed to do when the person you live with is drifting farther away every day.